Hello and welcome to another video. This is a video of my first read-through of the Words of Radiance. I'll be giving you a summary of what happens as I read, whilst giving my first reactions to what happens throughout the book. I decided to do this for a few reasons. One of the reasons was that immersing myself into good fictional stories are some of my favourite moments, and I thought it'd be cool to kind of document them. But I also thought it would be cool for people who've read this book and just wanted a refresh of what happens. Maybe it could take them back to when they first read it and remind them of their first reactions. I've decided to do this chapter by chapter, and there'll be timestamps in the description if you want to get to a specific point. Okay, so let's just get into the video. The Prelude is from the point of view of Jasna, which is already something that made me really happy because she was one of my favourite characters from the first book and I wanted to see more of her, so getting that straight away is a good sign. The Prelude takes place at the time of Gavilar's assassination. Jasna walks around the palace during the feast. She meets Gavilar, who's talking to Amaram, and it's revealed that her dad had planned for Jasna to marry Amaram. It says it wouldn't happen, but I think there's going to be more to that story. Jasna then notices her shadow acting strangely, and she ends up in Shadesmar, where we saw Shyllan go in the last book. After some struggle against a figure that looks like it's made of ink, she comes back to the palace and meets Liss. Liss is an assassin Jasna hired to kill her sister-in-law, Elokar's wife. She asks Liss not to kill her and instead to observe a little longer. Liss is a pretty cool character. She has a shard blade, and to remove the evidence of the burnt out eye sockets, she actually removes the eyes from her victims. It's also said that she is one of Szeth's old masters. We then get to Jasna seeing her dad's death, and we get to see when the Parshandi admit to hiring Szeth. The ones who admit it are 3 members of the ruling council of Parshandi. I like seeing more of the Parshandi and their culture other than them just being these brutal warriors that you have to fight against, which is kind of how I saw them in the first book. I also think it's really cool how this prelude takes place at the exact same moment as the first book's prelude, only from a different perspective. And I wonder if in the next book we'll get the same thing just from somebody else's perspective, like Dalinar, Amaram, I don't know, whoever. But yeah, I guess we'll see about that. Also, I kind of already assumed that Jasna went deeper into her scholarly works because of her dad's death, and it's kind of confirmed here that that is the reason. So, chapter 1 is from Shyllan's point of view. She's with Jasna on a ship to the Shattered Plains. While there, she begins to see strange patterns, first on the sketching paper and then in the sea, but nor she or Jasna understand what they are. Her and Jasna have a conversation about Shadesmar, Spren and Shyllan's family. She gives a lot of information on what the Spren are. Jasna says they're creatures created from collective human imagination, like ideas brought to life, and Shadesmar is like their realm, the realm of the mind. There's mentions of Spren cities and how there was an ancient betrayal by the humans towards the Spren. I really loved learning about this. The idea is so unique as well. I love how, since all the people see things like anger the same way in their heads, the anger Spren would take on the characteristics of what the majority of people think of it. Jasna also gives news to Shyllan that she's preparing her to be betrothed to Adolin to save Shyllan's family, which is a pretty interesting development. The chapter ends with Shyllan going into the sea to catch a glimpse of a rare creature called a Santhid. I really love moments like this in fantasy stories, when us and the characters feel the majesty of the world together. Chapter 2 is Kaladin's. He's at Dalinar's barracks with the bridge crew and he's laying out plans for the army he's in charge of. He gives roles to the other bridge crew members to train the 1,000 men he has, and he recruits Moash and Scar to join him in protecting Dalinar. It seems Shen, like the others, has been freed too, which, knowing who the Parshmen are now, makes me wonder what his story is going to entail. Maybe his experience with Kaladin will change his future. Maybe they'll experiment or do research on the Voidbringers with him. Afterwards, the bridge crew all receive uniforms, but decide to discard the old insignia for a new one that says Bridge 4. We're pretty much seeing the little family Kaladin created sticking together. During this chapter, Kaladin also has a talk with Teft about his abilities and his fate of becoming a Knights Radiant, but Kaladin still doesn't trust the higher-ups. He still has PTSD of sorts from the things the Light Eyes did to him. The way he describes the irrational panic he gets when thinking about those experiences reminded me of myself, to be honest, and I think that feeling of PTSD and panic is captured really well here. Just a little reminder before getting to the next chapter that if you like this video, it'd be awesome if you gave it a like, it'll help so much. In chapter 3, Shyllan sees the pattern again, which she realises is similar to the symbol on the symbol heads she saw in the last book. She draws it and it appears embossed on her paper before moving to the wooden floor. Jasna then comes into the room with a small ink-like figure in her hands, which when it sees Shyllan it fades away. Jasna explains that her and Shyllan have the abilities of the Knights Radiant, and that they each have a specific spren that they bond to, which I'm guessing for Kaladin is Syl. She also says that the spren look different in Shadesmar. Shyllan's are the cryptics, which look like the symbol heads, and Jasna's ink-like spren is the one we saw in the Prelude. But honest spren aren't mentioned, which makes me excited to see what Syl's going to look like in Shadesmar. Jasna also says the cryptics are like the light eyes of the cognitive realm, and that there's a conflict between them and the honest spren. I guess this might mean that if Shyllan and Kaladin ever meet, their spren may be at odds, which might cause like a conflict between the two characters. Chapter 4 starts with Dalinar in a vision. He's charging with a group of soldiers at the Pure Lake, which is an area with shallow water that stretches really far. It reminded me of the water world from Interstellar. The soldiers are being led by a female Radiant, and they're headed towards a fortress made of obsidian. The way the fortress is described sounded like the fortress in Mistborn. I've only read the first book in the Mistborn series so far, but I'm sure the obsidian fortress with arrow-like tires is the same fortress from that book. I know Brandon Sanderson's Cosme is linked, so it definitely could be it, but maybe I'm wrong, who knows. The soldiers are after a spren that's not acting right, and soon after, a spren in the river with red eyes creates a huge creature made out of the ground to fight the soldiers. Dalinar then hears the Almighty's voice, who tells him to unite them all again, and says a bunch of other mysterious stuff like he usually does. Dalinar wakes up after the vision and Navani jots it down. He prepares to share the king's proclamation and then goes to sleep, only to wake up with a mysterious message written on his wall that tells him he only has 62 days until death follows, until the Everstorm. Chapter 5 starts off with Kaladin hearing about the king's proclamation, that Gemhearts will be fought for by two High Prince armies working together, and the spoils will be distributed by the king. We then read from Sadius' perspective as he talks to his wife, who controls a group of spies and assassins. They plot together to find a way to bring Dalinar down, so they can have more war. Now finally seeing Sadius' perspective, I understand what motivates him, and it's basically the thrill of war that we read about with Dalinar in the last book. He just wants to fight really, so he's pretty much the complete opposite of Dalinar in this way as well. And later on, Kaladin goes to keep watch near Dalinar, and he's clearly going the extra mile to ensure nobody breaks in like he assumes they did before to do the writing on Dalinar's wall. The king's also there and takes a liking to Kaladin. I guess Kaladin's overprotective nature kinda like makes Elhokar's paranoia justified in a way I guess for him. Dalinar, the king, and a few of the others begin to discuss their plans to unite Elhocar. Kaladin gives a suggestion of disarming the High Princes if they don't obey, and Dalinar agrees. He plans to let Adolin duel the other High Princes to win their shards, hopefully leading to fighting against Sadius to win all of his shards. And he and Navani will try to convince the other High Princes to ally with them. During this conversation, Dalinar also admits that his end goal is refounding the Knights Radiant. It doesn't really go over that well with the rest of the people there, like the king and his sons, but we do see that Kaladin is like really shocked by this. Hopefully this means that Kaladin will like soon tell Dalinar about his abilities. In chapter 6, Shyllan is still on the ship, and she's studying her spren which she named Pattern. He's beginning to speak to her, but can only say basic things at this point. I find him kind of adorable in how like naive and ignorant he is about everything and the way to talk, which is pretty funny because in Shadesmar he'd be one of those super creepy symbol heads. He asks Shyllan to remember the first time she saw him, and she begins to see the deck around her change to grass and then into her dad's garden. It's not just in her mind either, because the captain of the ship comes in and sees it. It's also revealed that doing this drained Shyllan's spheres of their stormlight, so she goes to Jasna, who explains that it's just another one of her abilities, one of the surges called Illumination, which is the mastery of light, and she tells Shyllan to train herself in this. Shyllan then notices that Jasna looks really fatigued and like almost like she's been terrified by something. But Jasna tells her that she's been up all night anxious about the future. She mostly fears the Parshmen. She says the reason they're going to the Shattered Plains is to try and find the ancient city, Uretheru I think is how you pronounce it, which may give proof to convince the world of the Parshmen as Voidbringers. Jasna then gives Shyllan a new book about a specific order of the Radiance called the Words of Radiance. Before reading it, Shyllan goes to sleep and wakes up to smoke and screams. One thing I'm noticing so far with this book is that I'm enjoying Shyllan's chapters a lot more than before. I'm only 6 chapters in, but so far Shyllan's story is probably the one I'm most interested in. Chapter 7. Okay, this chapter was insane. Shyllan looks outside her cabin and sees strangers with torches, and then she sees one of them stab and kill Jasna. Like, what? I've no idea if like this is actually her death, and I'm kind of having trouble believing that it is her death. If it is, like, what? She was like one of my favourite characters so far in the book. I have to believe that she'll be back somehow. Maybe like, I don't know if she's resurrected, or I don't know if this was like an illusion or something, I don't know. But anyway, Shylana uses her stormlight to illuminate a shape of herself down the ship outside her bedroom, distracting all the men away from her. She then finds that the sailors above are being killed one by one. Shylana's solution to this is to soulcast the bottom of the ship, to sink it, and to cause chaos. I understand her reasoning to do this, kind of, but like, again, what? This doesn't sound like a good idea to me at all. The chapter ends with her in the ocean, struggling to find a way out, predictably, and then getting dragged further down by something which I suspect is the Santid. I don't really know what to say, to be honest. I really didn't expect things to get this crazy so soon in the book, but I guess I'll just have to carry on reading, so off to the next chapter. In chapter 8, we see Dalinar on a plateau run with Aladar, one of the High Princes. He tries to convince him of the plans to unite, but Aladar doesn't really agree with him. Honestly, some of what Aladar makes sense to me. He fears that when he goes on plateau runs with the other High Princes, they'll do to him what Sadius did to Dalinar. I understood exactly why he'd fear it. And then at the end of the chapter, Dalinar receives a letter that an old friend is arriving on the Shattered Plains who could help him with his problems, which I'm guessing is with his politicking, which isn't the best, as we know. Another thing I'll add is that at the start of each chapter so far, there's been these appendages from Navani so far that have been about loss. I originally thought this was just about maybe her husband or something, but at the beginning of this chapter it is revealed that Navani is actually grieving Jasnah's death, which I guess kinda confirms it, even though it doesn't say she's heard the news in the chapter itself. If she is gone, that's like really sad, because I've been saying for a while that she was one of my favourite characters. Also, it seemed like she was going to be really important for the future of the story, so that was like a major shock to me, especially this early. I didn't expect Jasnah to be killed off so quickly, if at all. I even had like a top 5 video for my favourite characters from The Way of King, and in that I said that if Jasnah was a point of view character in that book, she could have been like my favourite character. And then I said at the beginning of this video, when I first read the Prelude, that I was seeing her point of view and I thought that would mean that we're getting more of Jasnah, and then like 6 chapters later, she's dead. But I don't know, man, it's pretty sad so far, but I guess I'll just have to keep going and get to chapter 9. In chapter 9, Kaladin goes down to the chasms with the recruits to train them. He speaks to Syl for a while down there and asks her if there are others like him. She says that there are. She says a few Spren from her world are doing what she did and coming to the physical realm to find people like Kaladin. She says she came here against the wishes of the Spren there and the Stormfather. It sounds very much like the Spren and the humans are in a bit of a similar situation. Their world is probably at war and a few individuals see a threat coming and are uniting to stop it. Maybe Unite Them All could be about their Spren uniting to bring back the Knights Radiant, but maybe it's the humans and Spren uniting that could stop the Everstorm. I don't know. At the end of the chapter, Syl convinces Kaladin he needs to become a Knights Radiant. He then accepts this by agreeing to train his abilities. Chapter 10 takes place 6 years ago. Shylana is with her dad and it's after Shylana has accidentally killed someone. Her dad says he'll protect her. I originally thought Shylana was being treated badly by her dad and she had killed him, but I think I may be wrong about that. It seems like maybe Shylana's powers had manifested in her at a young age and her dad was trying to protect her and others, which is why he kept her locked at home. But this is only the first flashback we get of her chapter, so I guess we'll see more later. In chapter 11, Shylana washes up to the shore thanks to the Santid which saved her. She walks with Patton and finds Jasnah's chest with all her research in it. Chilan then takes it with her and finds a group of slavers, the ones that had taken Kaladin to the Shattered Plains at the beginning of the last book. Shylana begins to act with authority as she thinks maybe Jasnah would have, and gets the men to take her to the Shattered Plains. During this chapter, Shylana also tries to soulcast some sticks into fire. She fails, but we get some more info on Shadesmar. We learn that where there's land in the physical world, there's like ocean in Shadesmar, and where there's land in Shadesmar, there's ocean in our world. We also learned that it might be possible to visit Shadesmar to soulcast, whilst also staying and keeping your conscious in the physical world. Shylana tries this, but it doesn't really go that well. I also want to mention that it so far feels like Jasnah is really dead. I don't know, I still couldn't really believe it happened, but she was one of those characters which I had expected to grow to love so much more in the series, but she died so soon. I don't know, maybe she hasn't, and maybe somehow she will come back, hopefully. And I know I've kind of mentioned that about 3-4 times so far in this video, but I don't know, I just really did like her, so I don't know, let's just carry on. Chapter 12 starts with Kaladin training. He works with Rock, Lopen and Sigzil to learn new ways to use Stormlight to bind things. The training scene is like a really well put together action scene, and there's a bunch of banter between Kaladin and his friends. If I had to rate the Bridge 4 friends of Kaladin's, I'd say Rock is my favourite, and then it's Teft, then Lopen and Sigzil, and at the bottom is Moash and Scar. The chapter ends with Kaladin talking to Teft about the Knights Radiant and how Teft doesn't have much information on them. Kaladin then leaves the chasms and learns about the old friend that came to meet Dalinar. This part had me shocked. I didn't expect it at all to be Amaran. The tension in Kaladin and Dalinar's stories has just ramped up by a huge amount. In general, it kind of feels like a lot more is happening at a quicker pace in this book than the first, which is really great. The first book spent a lot of time, of course, world building, but now most of that stuff's been established. It's getting straight into the drama. So, that's the end of the first part of the Words of Radiance, and up next are the interludes. The first interlude is from the perspective of a Parshandi, Eshonai, the shard-bearer that Dalinar and Kaladin ran into at the tower. This chapter blew my mind. It made me see the story in a whole new light when we finally get some more information on the Parshandi, or as they call themselves, the listeners. They have got to be one of the most unique and interesting fantasy creatures I've ever read or seen anywhere in anything. Eshonai wanders around the central plateau, which they call Narak. It was the centre of an ancient city that used to be at the Shattered Plains, which I'm guessing is Uruthuru. During this chapter, we learn about how the Parshandi work. They take certain forms for different tasks. The armour on them is specifically for the war form. They have a work form, which doesn't commit violence but is still strong. They have a mate form, which is used for mating, a nimble form, which is for nurture and stuff, and dull form, which is the base form. There's also a slave form, which is the Parshmen, who have no soul or strength to them. It's said that there are hundreds of hidden forms which the listeners are currently trying to learn. Eshonai then meets with her sister about a new form, Storm form, which will allow them to summon a high storm. Eshonai doesn't really want to fight. We see that she really just wants to explore and discover new things about the world, but is stuck in this losing battle against the humans. She desperately wants to speak to Dalinar to try and make peace. We also learn the reason they killed Gavilar is because he revealed to them that he was going to do something that was going to summon the listeners' gods, which they didn't want. Before this chapter, I mostly saw the Parshandi as these barbarians, kinda like orcs, but there's so much more. They actually seem more peaceful than the humans, to be honest. I also really like Eshonai's character, and I have to say this is probably one of my favourite chapters so far in the book. In the second interlude, we see Yim, an old man who makes shoes for the children on the streets in exchange for their stories. One child comes to him and has a wound on his foot. Yim has a spren with him that he talks to, and he uses Stormlight to heal the boy's foot. Afterwards, the man enters his house with a crescent on his face. He uses a shard blade and kills Yim for murdering someone 40 years before. During this interlude, we also learn of Yim's religious beliefs of the One, how all beings started out as one and split to experience different things, and will one day return to being one again. This is something I've enjoyed a lot from all of Brandon Sanderson's books I've read so far. He comes up with so many interesting religions in his stories. In the third interlude, Rysn is going to the Reshi Islands to trade something by order of her. He wants her to trade by herself. She learns that these islands move because they're actually gigantic creatures that people live on top. This reminded me a lot of the lion turtles from Avatar. Rysn then speaks to the king and tries to trade, but fails because she keeps offending them. To save her trade, she tries to act bold and jumps off a cliff, like she saw the islanders do to show off when she first got there. During this fall, she seemingly breaks her legs and is left paralysed. However, the trade worked because the Reshi gave her a rare small creature that flies and has silver eyes. In the fourth interlude, we're back with Eshonai. She visits her mother and asks her about the stories of before when they left their gods. This scene with her mum is kinda heartbreaking because it seems like she has a debilitating condition with her memory. She confuses Eshonai with her sister, for example, and begins to talk about Eshonai as the sister that would leave home too often. Then, with the story, she speaks of how long ago the listeners were given an extremely powerful form by their gods, which I'm guessing is probably the Voidbringers. This form was their most powerful, but they were stuck being obedient to the gods, having no free will. So to gain freedom, the listeners abandoned that form for one that was much weaker. It's said that maybe them learning more forms is them getting closer to the gods, closer to them becoming Voidbringers again. After this, Shylana leaves to meet the five, which are members of the ruling council. Each has a different form. Her and her sister have a Stormsprend trapped in a gemstone that, once used in a high storm with the listener, can transform them into a new form. Shylana argues against using this because she fears that it's going to bring back the gods. The others say that they need to do it, so Shylana compromises by saying that she'll be the first one to transform into storm form. She starts training with her sister to get ready for the transformation, but still wants to find a way to speak to Dalinar and sue for peace before she has to go through with it. In chapter 13, we're back with Shyllan. She's still travelling with the slaves towards the Shattered Plains. She looks through Jasnah's trunk of her most precious possessions and finds the picture Shyllan drew of her on the first day they met, which really broke my heart. She also realises the broken Fabrial is under the sea, so it can't be repaired for her brothers. She has a conversation with Patton, who's getting better at communicating, and Shyllan has a little memory of her dad, but she quickly represses it. Chapter 14 is Adolin's first POV chapter, or solo POV chapter in the series. He hasn't been a favourite of mine so far. I mean, there's nothing wrong with him, but I just haven't seen enough of him to have a strong opinion. In this chapter, he prepares for the first of his duels. It starts off with him talking to his Shardblade, which I have to admit was pretty funny, and it ends with him brutally defeating his opponent, easily winning a Shardblade for Renarin. The fight was as usual awesome, and I did like seeing Adolin's quirks with his superstitions. He also still has issues with Kaladin, but I don't think that's going to lead to any major conflicts in the story. I basically agree with Renarin that the only reason Adolin's annoyed is that Kaladin ordered him around back at the tower. In chapter 15, we're back with Shyllan and the slavers, travelling across the Frostlands. Shyllan fears that the men will try something dodgy, so she uses Patton to spy on them. She hears that they want to sell her at the location, which she doesn't like, so she begins to talk to this guy, whose name I can't say. She tells him of the betrothal and how she'll reward him upon arrival to the Shattered Plains, but he doesn't buy into it, so then she admits that she knows of his debts and that they'd be paid. While saying this, she also becomes really mad, and it's the first time I've seen Shyllan like this. I know it's just her trying to be like Jasnah, but I have to admit it was pretty convincing. It was pretty badass, to be honest. After this guy is clearly scared, and then they're told that there's bandits around and that they have to hurry to escape them, so they do. I don't know if Shyllan admitting she knew what he said was a good idea. Maybe scaring him would keep him in her control, but maybe he's going to see that as a threat and choose to abandon her or something, but I guess we'll see about that. Chapter 16 has Kaladin on guard duty for Adolin and Renarin, as Renarin finds a swordmaster to train with. During this chapter, we see Kaladin is very much wanting to get revenge on Amaram. He even judges Dalinar for being friends with him, still argues against this and tries to keep Kaladin level-headed. She pretty much kind of says what I want to say to Kaladin, that Dalinar isn't like Amaram, that he is genuinely honourable, and that Kaladin should really just talk to him about Amaram. But I have to admit that Kaladin's worries that Dalinar won't stand for Kaladin berating the name of Amaram are reasonable ones. In this chapter, we also see Adolin butt heads with Kaladin. They clearly both don't like each other, but I think there may be a moment in this book that'll get them both on the same side again. I hope so anyway. I just really want Kaladin and Dalinar to get along, and I guess it's really annoying to see things keep getting in their way. This chapter ends with Kaladin meeting a soldier turned Arden, Zahel, who he thought looked suspicious. It turns out that the man is just one of the swordmasters that's going to be training Renarin. In chapter 17, Shyllan travels with the slaves and notices that the deserters are following them. To distract herself, she begins to draw. She draws a woman that's described kind of like Jasnah, but she puts her own face on the woman. She then begins to draw herself in ballrooms and at the Shattered Plains looking for what Jasnah was looking for. At the end, she draws Jasnah as she saw her on the ship that night, exhausted. Shyllan is also acting more and more like Jasnah, and to be honest, it seems like it's working to get things done. During this chapter, we also see Shyllan talking with Patton. She tries to practice her light weaving abilities, and although she's learned to breathe in stormlight, she can't really light weave yet. Patton also reveals that in a way he's a scholar like her, and his goal was to learn as much about people and the world before he's killed by them. The reason he thinks this is because of what the Knights Radiance did. They bonded with their Spren but then killed them. I don't really think it's necessarily killing them, but the fact that Spren, when they bond with humans, they gain more thought and life. So when the Knights Radiant unbonded from them and gave up their oaths, the Spren lost their thought, lost their life. Shyllan promises to never kill him. Patton then also says that Shylana is becoming more and more like a Knights Radiant because she's learning the oaths, but that she'll have to admit more truths to grow further. Like I mentioned before, I'm really enjoying Shyllan's chapters a lot more. I don't know if it's her becoming stronger willed or it's the conversations and revelations we get with Patton, but her story's really working for me a lot more this time round. In chapter 18, Kaladin is still at the practice grounds guarding for Adolin and Renarin. He watches as Zahel trains Renarin, which Zahel claims could end up being good with a Shardblade, which surprised both me and Kaladin. This then leads to Zahel telling Kaladin he should use a Shardblade to fight against the shard-bearing assassins that may come. Kaladin says that he'd be just fine, and then we get what is probably my favourite moment in this book so far. Kaladin and Zahel sparring to see if Kaladin could actually protect Renarin during an attack. Kaladin with only one spear and Zahel with a Shardblade. It ends with kind of a draw, but then Adolin joins to fight and we get a little fight between Kaladin and Adolin. Adolin wins this easily in his Shardblade, and it's clear both of them were doing more than just sparring. Kaladin ends up being pretty hurt and clearly loses the fight. This scene was absolutely badass, and it was also actually pretty sad when Kaladin at the end was scared to use too much Stormlight to heal himself in case they saw. He's really scared that the Light Eyes are going to take away his powers from him somehow. Zahel tells Kaladin he could use some training, which Kaladin then agrees to, and Zahel also then calls Kaladin similar to Adolin, which Kaladin obviously gets offended by. This wasn't only funny, but it makes me think that maybe someday they'll actually be great friends if they got over the differences. Yep, I'm gonna say I predict that that's gonna happen, and I do hope it does too. Chapter 19 is another flashback of Shyllan's, a few months after the last one. It turns out I was completely wrong about what happened last time. I thought it was Shyllan that had killed someone, but it was her dad. I guess the reason I thought it was Shyllan was because of the wording of one of the sentences that said Shyllan didn't know if a monster deserved love when her dad hugged her, but I guess she was talking about her dad being the monster. It turns out he killed Shyllan's mum and her mum's lover while she was there watching. We see Shyllan's eldest brother, who has a Shardblade, threaten her dad, but Shyllan tells him to stop, which stops him because it's the first words Shyllan has said in months. Since Shyllan ends up with the Shardblade, I'm guessing it's this one. Maybe her brother will give it to her for protection, but I'm predicting that her brother gets killed by her dad and then Shyllan kills her dad to get it, because Shyllan did say in the last book that the Shardblade was like the fruits of her biggest sin or something, so I'm guessing that's the way it's gonna happen. In chapter 20, Shyllan travels with the men to find that the deserters had been attacked by a different caravan crew. When reaching it, they find a woman that says there are two sets of deserters, one group ahead and one behind. Shyllan decides to take care of the situation when one group attacks and heads towards the other group of deserted soldiers, which shockingly includes Gaz. I can't remember what exactly happened to him in the last book, but I do like how this book is tying into that one. Shyllan then persuades the deserters to fight for her, to reclaim their honour and protect her people from the other group of deserters. This is one of my favourite moments from the book so far. Shyllan ends up using her light weaving powers to make herself look better than she did. Her hair becomes curled instead of tangled, and it appears that she's wearing a clean dress. Then, she inspires the men to fight for her against the deserters. Bluth, one of the men that was travelling with her with the slavers, who'd not really shown much emotion towards her, began to cheer after she'd done this. And I have to admit, I really love moments like this when characters inspire a bunch of people. I don't know exactly why I like them so much, but it was these types of scenes that made me love Daenerys so much from Game of Thrones. Also, Shyllan's light weaving powers are so cool. I wonder what other stuff she'd be able to do. Like, can she make herself only look slightly different, or can she like make herself look like a chasm fiend or something? Chapter 21 opens with the aftermath of the battle. Shyllan sees Bluth is among those who died. It's funny because I only mentioned him in the last chapter and he's already dead, but he's actually been in a few of Shyllan's chapters so far, and honestly his death hit me kinda hard. A few chapters back Shyllan drew Bluth. He usually looks rough and has a grumpy personality, but she drew him as the man she thought he could be. He never gave the sketch much attention back then, but after his death Shyllan finds that the image is in his jacket pocket. This was so heartbreaking. He wasn't even like a major character or anything, but this moment still got me pretty bad. The rest of the chapter shows Shyllan taking over everything. Her acting like Jasna is really working for her now. She convinces the caravan crew to join her in going to the Shattered Plains with her in charge, and she gets this guy to give up his slaves to her, which she agrees to pay for service until they're free of their debt. The soldiers also see the saved men and women and children, and realise that they've reclaimed their honour. But the leader of them, Vatha, I think is how you pronounce his name, is unconvinced. He gets aggressive with Shyllan, not believing in her promises, but Patton comes to the rescue by going onto his back on his uniform and telling him to leave her alone, creeping him out. This kind of reminded me in the first Toy Story movie when Woody, as a toy, speaks in front of Sid to get him to run away. In chapter 22, Kaladin is guarding the king, Adolin and Renarin during a high storm. Navani and Dalinar are in another room. Kaladin notices Adolin looking to the sketches of Alethi fashion. When he brings it up, Adolin gets annoyed and they get into a little spat about whether Kaladin needs to guard them during a high storm. Even though they argue, I still kinda like reading their interactions. It's pretty funny, and as I said before, I can already see them being good friends. After the storm, Dalinar comes back and says his vision was a repeat. They talk a little bit about Adolin's duels, and Kaladin points out some problems with the plan. Dalinar finds Kaladin's input useful like he did before as well, and later on Kaladin speaks to Dalinar about Amaram. He admits what happened. I was so happy to see him admit it. I was kind of scared he was going to keep it to himself, but I'm glad he finally said something. Dalinar's reactions was as I'd expected. He didn't really call Kaladin a liar, but he didn't jump to his side either. To be honest, it's understandable considering his position. Kaladin still gets annoyed by this, and he says that no matter what happens, he'll find his own justice, which I guess could make things really messy in the future, if he does kill Amaram in front of everyone. At the end, Kaladin sees Shen, who says he's still a slave, Bridge 4 slave, which hurts Kaladin a lot, but there's nothing he can really do considering he's a Parshman. After that, a guard runs from the palace to tell Kaladin that there's an assassin. In chapter 23, Kaladin rushes to the palace and sees an assassination was attempted on the king. There was no assassin seen anywhere, but the railing at the king's balcony, where he often goes to lean on, was sabotaged. While reading this, I was thinking of who it could be. I thought it could again be Elgar faking an assassination, but then I wondered, if it wasn't him, who else could it be? And I don't know why, but I thought of Renarin. The reason I thought this was because of how little we get of him in the story. He's still one of the main characters at the Shattered Plains, but he's the one we know the least about. I guess I'm also kind of thinking of which character would be the most unexpected. Later on in the chapter, we hear Kaladin and Dalinar talking. They discover the railing was cut by a shard blade, and that whoever did it was someone cowardly who would want it to be seen as an accident. Reading this kinda confirmed it in my mind. I'll go ahead and make a prediction that Renarin is the one behind these assassination attempts. I could be so wrong, because I don't really see any kind of motivation for it, but I don't know. It's just where my crazy mind went, I guess. I think it's pretty cool how I'm making these predictions and you're gonna see how wrong I am with them. Chapter 24 starts with Shyllan talking to Gaz and some of the other soldiers. He seems a whole lot more pleasant than he did before with Kaladin, but the reason for that is probably that he was above Kaladin and Shyllan is now above him. Shyllan then speaks to Patton and it's revealed that the Voidbringers have their own type of spren, which is called odium or hatred, hate spren. After this, Tin, the woman who was in charge of the other caravans, asks for Shyllan. They eat dinner together and discuss Shyllan's plans. Tin knows Shyllan isn't saying who she is, and using a span read, she finds out that Shyllan is from House Devar, which isn't very big. Tin asks Shyllan if she can help her with her con going forward. Shyllan doesn't tell Tin exactly what she's planning, but says she has a secret for Dalinar. Since Tin knows more about the Shattered Plains and Shyllan knows she needs help to maneuver her way around the higher-ups to do what she needs to do, she accepts her help. In chapter 25, Kaladin trains with some of his men to ride horses. Kaladin is afraid of them and so he chooses an older and less threatening horse to ride on. Adolin makes fun of him for it and then tells him to try another horse, Dreamstorm, which is much more aggressive. Kaladin then does exactly that. He uses Stormlight to bind himself to the saddle, but it doesn't last and he gets thrown off. Dalinar sees this and tells Kaladin to train with the horses regularly. After that, Adolin says thanks to Kaladin for not telling his dad that it was him who put Kaladin up to riding Dreamstorm. I can see it start to happen already. I bet by the end of this book they'll be great friends. The chapter ends with Kaladin seeing Dalinar and his two sons meeting Amaram. All of them looking cheerful and happy makes Kaladin really angry, and I feel him so much. You can tell Kaladin is starting to get closer to these guys, especially Dalinar, so it must be really annoying for him to see them with Amaram. In chapter 26, we're with Adolin as he fights against Parshandi with another Shardbearer, a friend of his called Jakamav. Dalinar had sent Adolin to help with their Plateau Run to show them working together. While there, Adolin sees Ashonai, who tells him she wants to speak to Dalinar. He agrees and she says she'll send a messenger. After the run, in which the humans were successful, Adolin speaks to Jacamab and offers to hang out later on, but Jacamab refuses, saying he doesn't want to be seen with Adolin because of Dalinar and their family's reputation. It hurts Adolin and he questions whether he even has any friends, but he agrees Dalinar is right and it's good to be loyal to him. Renarin was also at the battle, but he froze before being able to fight. He says he's a coward, but that he needs to be ready to fight soon. He tells Adolin there was another note on Dalinar's wall, saying that there are only 49 days until a new storm comes. Chapter 27's another flashback of Shyllan. She meets with one of her brothers, Van Jushu, who says he's the only sane person in the family left, since Nan-Balat is starting fires. Shyllan is staring at a wall, and the eldest brother is rarely there. It's said here that their dad only seems to respect and like the eldest brother, which could disprove my theory that her dad kills the eldest brother to take his shardblade. The chapter ends with Shyllan looking towards a glowing box through the wall which her brother can't see. Shyllan describes the light as a monster and her mother's soul, which brings about so many questions. How is her mother's soul there? Is it a spren? Was her mum a monster? Is that why her dad really killed her? Shyllan's backstory is so freaking mysterious and I love it. In chapter 28, Shyllan and Tin are trying out different accents Shyllan could use. Then they reach close to the Shattered Plains and they find 4 men on horseback. Turns out it's Kaladin and his men. When Shyllan goes up to talk to him with Tin, Tin tells Kaladin Shyllan is a Honia, and what ensues is a hilarious scene of Shyllan trying to pretend she's a Hornita. When Kaladin questions her, she pretends to get offended and demands his shoes, which of course Kaladin gives to her. I love their first interaction, but I'm hoping this Hornita charade doesn't last too long. It wouldn't really work with what she needs to tell Dalinar and Navani, considering Cal will usually be right beside them when it happens. I'm also starting to wonder if Shyllan will be thought of as an assassin. I hope it doesn't turn out that way, but her surviving, where Yasna and the rest of the men on the ship died, I could see people thinking she's an assassin, but yeah, damn, all the main characters are together now in the same place. In chapter 29, Sadius is on a plateau run, but it's not one that was scheduled for him. Him and Amaram are together. When they talk, you can tell Sadius knows the real Amaram, and that they're kind of on the same side. I like this because maybe somehow Amaram will slip up and Dalinar will know to trust Kaladin, and Kaladin to trust Dalinar. From this chapter I started to hate Sadius, especially how he mentions the Parshandi and how he wants to kill the ones that surrendered to him. He also goes on about them being lesser beings, that he's doing the right thing by killing. Afterwards, Sadius watches Adolin fight in a duel. He can tell Adolin is not trying his hardest and trying to not look threatening so others will duel him. Sadius has some plans to try and get Adolin on his side it seems, but I really doubt that would work. Sadius and his wife also talk about the assassination attempt on Elokar, and I'm really starting to realise that my theory of Renarin being the one who's behind the assassination attempt is really out there. I highly doubt I'm right about that one, but I guess I'll stick to it just because I said I would, and I guess you can watch me be completely wrong about it. In chapter 30, Shyllan is still travelling with Tin and is getting closer to the Shattered Plains. Tin says that she needs to be prepared and asks Shyllan what her plans are. Shyllan tells her about her betrothal to Adolin, although she doesn't exactly say it's her who was betrothed. She implies that she's going to pretend to be the woman who was supposed to marry Adolin. She does this because she wants to keep Tin close to teach her more about being a con artist. Tin then agrees to help Shyllan with this love scam as they make their way to the Shattered Plains. Shyllan also thinks of what she may do if the betrothal doesn't work out. She says she'll still have to find Irithuru. One thing that she hasn't mentioned so far is how she's going to tell people about Jasna. To be honest, I'd be more anxious about that than anything else. Chapter 31 starts with Kaladin preparing for another high storm coming soon. We then go to Shyllan, who's with Tin and making camp just outside the Shattered Plains. Tin tells Shyllan that the king and a bunch of his sons were killed by Zeth, meaning there'd be a succession war in her home of Yarkaved. Shyllan begins to worry for her brothers. They then camp outside the Shattered Plains, preparing for the high storm. Chapter 32 starts with Kaladin dreaming during a high storm. He'd been sleeping on the job. He dreams of the Stormfather who tells Kaladin that Syl trusts him, but that she shouldn't trust Cal, who he says is gonna murder her. Cal says he wouldn't do that, but the Stormfather says all humans are traitors. The Stormfather then says that he's sorry about the fact that someone's coming. He says he is coming. He keeps telling Kaladin that until he wakes up. He gets to the balcony and looks out into the high storm, seeing Syl coming towards him. What happens next is the craziest moment in the book so far. Kaladin hears from Syl that something terrible is about to happen, that someone is coming, someone with hate. Kaladin gets the king and the rest of the Kaladin family and takes them out of the palace, but unfortunately they run into Szeth. Dalinar, Adolin and Kaladin stand together to fight him, and it's an epic battle. Dalinar and Kaladin get pushed away and Kaladin fights him, but of course he doesn't win. In fact, Szeth swings his shardblade through Kaladin's arm, which leaves it dull and grey and lifeless, meaning Kaladin would never be able to use a spear again. Szeth then goes to Dalinar to kill him, but Dalinar literally stops the shardblade with his hands. Kaladin then quickly barges into Szeth and the two of them fall out of the palace. So much stuff happened here, and it was all so freaking epic. Although the only thing that's sticking in my mind is what Syl says. She says Szeth isn't a Radiant, saying he doesn't have a spren. The way she speaks about him is like he's some sort of evil being, but we know Szeth is a really nice guy who's being forced to do all of this stuff. Well, actually, I guess we don't really know everything about him, but still, that kind of confused me, but I guess we'll find out more about it later on. Chapter 33 starts with Cal falling down with Szeth. While in the air, he breathes from Szeth's fears and they both land. Kaladin's Stormlight then heals his arm and Szeth is shocked. Cal tells Szeth he's a Windrunner too, and Szeth then says some mysterious stuff. He says that they called him a liar, called him Truthless. Then he asks if they're all back, and Cal says yes, prompting Szeth to run away. What is going on? This is so freaking epic, but I still have no idea what's happening. Kaladin then goes back in the palace and the others are surprised he's alive. He doesn't tell them the truth, which is annoying. I kind of thought they'd see his arm go lifeless and it being back to normal would be the trigger to him admitting everything, but that's not really what happens. We then get a little of Adolin saying he did see Kaladin's arm getting cut, he just hadn't admitted it. But a little while later on, Adolin admits that he did see Kaladin's arms get cut, but he just didn't admit it, and he's beginning to grow suspicious of Kaladin. Now knowing of Sadius' plans, I'm scared Aladin's story may not go the way I want it to. They then see another scratched note on the door. It says that there's 38 days till the end of all nations. At the end of this chapter, Kaladin sees one of the dead soldiers and is reminded of how much death he saw before. He blames himself for bringing these men to duty with him. Syl then talks to him about Szeth. Cal says maybe Szeth isn't evil, but is doing things from a different perspective, and maybe his Honestbrand knows that. But Syl says she's the only Honestbrand that came from Shadesmar. She also says Szeth's shardblade was different than the usual ones. In chapter 34, Shyllan is with Tin. They talk about how Shyllan will have to betray the soldiers considering they have a bounty on their heads. Shyllan doesn't agree to doing that, but Tin insists she'll have to, that there's no other option. I was thinking that maybe Shyllan could have used her light weaving to disguise the soldiers. After this, Tin uses the span reed with Shyllan and it reveals that Yasna is dead, and she had a ward with her with red hair, so Shyllan's cover is broken. This also reveals that Tin is an assassin who went to kill Yasna. Tin attacks Shyllan, but Shyllan ends up using her shardblade and kills Tin. The soldiers, Vathar and Gaz, and some of the others see her like this with the shardblade. Shyllan then looks to the span reed and realises the Ghost Bloods, the ones behind all of this, are also looking for info on Urithiru. They ask if Tin wants to meet with them, and Shyllan replies yes, meaning she'll probably use her light weaving to disguise herself as Tin. What a great ending to part 2 in this book. This book is delivering so much so far. One thing I've noticed that I like more about this Over the Way of Kings is that the reveals and the action is spread out a lot more. As much as I love the first book, it was definitely a lot slower in the first half with all the major reveals and action events saved for the end. Here it feels like I'm getting moments from the end of the last book, 2/5 of the way into the book. If this also ends with a bang like the last one did, it will have to be truly insane to feel like one compared to what there already is so far. But anyway, let's get to the next set of interludes. In the 5th interlude, Ashana is going into the storm. She sent messengers to meet the Alethi, but it's time for her to transform into storm form. The way this is done is by her going into the storm and seeing the Stormfather. She describes the Stormfather as a god for the humans only. Apparently he's abandoned the listeners to protect the humans. He's also described as a spren. Ashonai then begins the transformation. The spren from the gemstone has a red light and goes into her chest, and she begins to transform. The Stormfather says that it was something that was going to happen anyway, despite the fact that the way he says it makes it sound like something wrong's about to happen. Maybe this spren is the red spren Dalinar saw in the Pure Lake vision at the start. It also says during her transformation that the rhythms were fleeing her mind, so I don't know, maybe this is the Voidbringer form we've seen already, because it kinda sounds a bit like Ashona has lost her soul, so maybe this is her without her free will. Maybe the red spren's the one in control now. It'd be sad to see this because I was actually starting to like Ashona quite a bit, so seeing her personality go away would be pretty sad. The 6th interlude is from Zahel's perspective, and all it really shows is that Kaladin will train with him to fight against Shardblade. The 7th interlude was from the perspective of Taln, who is the herald of war that we saw right at the end of the Way of Kings. It seems his body was taken to Elokar with Wit and some others. Wit apparently ran off into the wilds while they were on their journey. The herald keeps talking and says things about the desolation that's coming, and how the other heralds will return to train people to fight against it. In the 8th interlude, Ashonai returns in her new form. The way her appearance is described is so awesome, with red lines and red sparks that appear when she does something. She also has red eyes. One of the listeners says something about red eyes in one of the songs, but he's cut off before he can say anything else. Ashonai has definitely changed. She speaks about transforming everyone into storm form to destroy the humans. It's also described that she's purposefully not listening to the voice screaming in horror she can hear inside. I'm glad she sent the messengers before the transformation. Hopefully something will come out of it, because it'll be sad if Ashona never goes back to who she was. In chapter 35, Adolin meets with a soulcaster to learn of the Knights Radiant and what they could do, so he would know which abilities Szeth used exactly and to find a way to fight against him. Then we see Navani with the Ardents working on something new, a platform that rises into the air. Chapter 36 starts with Shylana pondering about how she wasn't the same frightened girl from before. If you watch my top 5 characters videos from the Way of Kings, I mentioned how Shylana seems to have a pretty predictable character arc. I knew she'd go from the shy girl to someone with more confidence. I compared her to Pam from The Office, and honestly I think that comparison kinda stands. They're both shy girls who are great at art and begin to become more confident and stronger willed, often making things happen for themselves. Even how Shylana is now playing the part to get what she wants reminds me of how Pam would get various jobs that wouldn't necessarily be possible for her. However, even though I felt it was predictable, it's done really well here. The rest of the chapter has Shylana entering the king's palace. She meets Kaladin, who catches her out in the lie. She tells him the truth and wants him to give Navani a sheet of paper that was used in a Spanwood conversation between her and Jasna. But before he does so, he has trouble believing her because of Gaz. Kaladin sees him, and then Kaladin and Shylana have an argument where they both lose control. At the start it was kinda cute, but it ended pretty badly with Shylana mentioning Cal's parents. Cal then gives the note, and Shylana is sent inside to meet Dalinar and Navani. In chapter 37, Adolin gets another duel by putting all of his family's shards up for only one of his opponents. After this, he sees Sadius, who tells Adolin betraying Dalinar was a favour. Adolin was about to punch Sadius, but Amaram stopped him and calmed him down. I don't know exactly what Sadius is planning, but I doubt Adolin would ever be persuaded to do anything against Dalinar. Adolin then sees Shylana enter, and he clearly likes what he sees. When he approaches, he hears her talking to Dalinar and Navani that Jasna had just died. In chapter 38, Shylana speaks to Navani about Jasna, and then speaks to Dalinar about her betrothal. Dalinar says that she'll have to convince them of it. She then meets Adolin, and they clearly really like each other. It's pretty cute, I ain't gonna lie. After this, she watches the High Princes, and the kings continue their meeting. It's about Szeth, and also about the king's rules about the gem hearts and plateau runs. In the middle of it, the High Princes notice Shylana. They want news of Yarkaved, which she doesn't have, but knowing she's betrothed to Adolin, they'll want to be closer to her to have more info. Dalinar had offered her to work as a clerk for him, but she thought she'd have more freedom at another war camp, where she wouldn't be a simple worker for Dalinar. She takes a risk and pretends one of the High Princes had offered her to stay with him. She chooses Sabariel, one that Jasna really hated, and it works. It also says this risk is one Jasna wouldn't have approved of, And I love this because it shows that Shallan's new confident self isn't just her imitating Jasna anymore. She's being herself, just more confident. After this, Dalinar speaks to the High Princes and reveals he's had an offer of peace from the Parshandi and that he intends to try and make peace with them once and for all, and if they don't agree, he'll destroy them once and for all, ending the war on the Shattered Plains. Chapter 39 takes place 4 years ago. It's another Shyllan flashback. Shylana is with her dad and brothers at a feast where her dad announces he has planned on getting married again. A man then comes inside. It's the bastard son of a high prince. He has one light eye and one dark. He questions her dad about the death of his wife. Shylana and the brothers are told to go to the side, and Shylana begins to make her brothers laugh to try and lighten the mood. The high prince's son then asks Shylana and her brothers to speak up, but none of them do. Shylana is told to say something since her dad doesn't treat her badly and she actually saw what happened, but Shylana isn't sure exactly what she saw. She hasn't really confirmed exactly what happened either. Everyone else thinks her dad killed her mum, but there definitely seems to be more going on. In chapter 40, Shylana arrives at Sabarial's war camp. She meets his mistress, Pelona, and finally relaxes after her long trip. I actually like Sabarial. He's an old man who's pretty miserable and kinda Scroogey, but also he kinda knows he's that way, which makes him more likeable to me, I don't know why. Also, it seems that those who live with him do actually like him. It also shows how he's been doing badly on the Plateau Runs, but began to make mills to make clothes and food, knowing there'd be a good way to make money in the Shattered Plains that didn't need to come from gem hearts. In chapter 41, Cal is back down in the chasms to train. Before doing so, he has a conversation with Sigzil, Rock and Lopin about the assassin in white, and Syl makes herself visible to Sigzil. After this, Kaladin actually manages to make himself land on the chasm wall like Szeth did. While there, he speaks with Syl, saying he needs to know if Dalinar is truly honourable before admitting his powers to him and becoming a Knights Radiant. He still doesn't like the Amaram situation. He then says he's going to kill Amaram. Soon afterwards, they find the chasm walls have been scratched by a chasm fiend. Then Kaladin goes back to Bridge 4 and sees Renarin there. Renarin pleads with Kaladin to let him join Bridge 4 because he wants to be useful as a soldier. Kaladin hesitates at first, but then agrees to speak to Dalinar about it. I like that Renarin is having a bit more to do in the plot. Also, the more I think about it, the more I realise my initial thoughts that Renarin was behind the assassination attempts makes less and less sense. Although he could easily do it, his motivation seems so focused on other stuff, and I don't really see how it would connect to wanting to kill Elhokar. I'm definitely prepared to be wrong about that one. This chapter ends with Moash asking Cal to go and hang out, and Cal refusing, telling Syl he can't live that life anymore, which really made me sad for him, but I'm sure eventually the good people around him will bring him out of this hole he's been in for so long. In chapter 42, Shylana practices her light weaving by disguising as Tin. She then speaks to Tin's employers via the Spanreed and plans on meeting them at Sabarial's war camp that night, so Shylana gets ready by disguising herself as a dark-eyed woman. Chapter 43 starts with Shylana travelling through the poorer dark-eyed areas in the war camp as a dark-eyed woman. Since we spent so much time with the nobility in this story, it was good to have a little bit more on the regular everyday people in this world. Shylana then meets the Ghostbloods. The leader, Mraize, tasks Shylana with going to find information on Amaram. He also tells her not to hurt him, that his life is meant for someone else. Which makes me kind of think of Kaladin. Does this guy somehow know about Kaladin, or is there someone else who wants to kill Amaram? Shylana then leaves planning to help Mraize with Amaram's secrets to get closer to them so she can learn more about the Ghostbloods. Chapter 44 wasn't a chapter that had much significant stuff happen in it, but it was still one of the best chapters in the book so far. It's from Cal's perspective while he's training with Zahel and the other Light Eyes. We hear some thoughts from Kaladin on Shylana who arrives there. He watches and thinks of her on the same level as Sadius. He says she's not evil, just that she doesn't care. Society is built the way that it is, and Shylana and the other Light Eyes just fulfill their roles on top. What was so strong about this moment for me was how Shylana is someone we know and care about. So hearing this talk of her from Cal was kinda shocking, but I can't say it isn't true. In the last chapter, Shylana was around Dark Eyes and said how it was freeing and how she enjoyed it. But if you think about it, she doesn't really understand this situation at all. I wouldn't be surprised if she confronts this later on. In the rest of the chapter, Bridge 4 discuss if Shylana could be the assassin, which I predicted would happen. Cal checks on her as she speaks to Adolin. They flirt a little as Shylana plays hard to get, and Kaladin goes back to speak to Moash, who admits he's trying to kill the king. Apparently, Moash's grandparents had business rivals who were Elhokar's friends, so Elhokar tried to help his friends by placing Moash's grandparents in a dungeon. as he tried to find some paperwork on them. But he took so long that Moash's grandparents died. This again shows such a disregard for the life of the Light Eyes towards the Dark Eyes, but it also proves me entirely wrong on my terrible theory that Venerin was the one responsible for the assassination attempts. So, I get one theory right, that Shyllan was going to be suspected to be an assassin, but then I got one completely wrong straight after. After this, Moash tells Kaladin to meet these people before he tries to stop Moash from doing what he's doing. In chapter 45, it's another Shyllan flashback. 3.5 years ago, Shyllan is with her family at a fair. Her dad has a meeting, so Shyllan goes around playing matchmaker for her brother, Nan Balat, and a girl he was crushing on. We basically see Shyllan trying to make things better for her family. Her family dynamic is really heartbreaking. After the death of their mother, all the kids are broken. I can't wait to see her brothers return to the main story. It'd be nice if they became more major parts of the plot. Afterwards, Shyllan sees her dad speaking to a messenger with the news of their eldest brother Helaran. She meets with him later on, and he begins to ask her if she speaks to Spren and if spears lose Stormlight around her. These questions prompt memories of her mum's soul in a box, which we read about earlier. The man then gets Shyllan to picture a perfect thought, and she light weaves it around her. The man then tells her to train and says her brother is an Elethkar. This is strange as hell because of how Shyllan didn't know about any of this stuff later on. She clearly has some repressed memories of sorts from her past, but I wonder if it's more than that. We know Dalinar used old magic to rid memories of his deceased wife, so maybe something similar has happened to Shyllan. I'm really liking this mystery of Shyllan's family so far. In chapter 46, Kaladin meets with Shen to give him a weapon, saying there are no slaves in Bridge 4. We then see Kaladin reluctantly go with Bridge 4 to a tavern for some drinks with them. Rock gives us a few stories of this homeland and their gods, which was really interesting to learn about. Apparently Rock has met a god in the hot springs atop the mountain peaks. He says when in there you can see a place where the gods live. This piqued Kaladin's interest, but soon after Moash tells him the real reason he called him there was to meet his friends. We then meet Graves, a light-eyed man who tells Kaladin he's trying to kill Elethkar to save Elethkar. He says this to try and help Dalinar become the king. What he says makes sense to Kaladin, but Kaladin tells Moash he won't do it. Moash says Graves is a good man and treats people equally, that he even has a dark-eyed wife, but Kal doesn't accept the offer to help in Elethkar's assassination. I like that there's more political intrigue growing with different factions. I mean, from the sounds of it, these guys aren't really bad. They seem to be in agreement with what Dalinar wants for the country, a united Elethkar. In chapter 47, Shyllan is talking to Patton about Urithiru, looking over the ancient maps which place it in different areas. Patton begins to try and read Daunchan, an ancient language, and they discuss how Urithiru may not be in the Shattered Plains, but how it may be reached from there. Shyllan reads Jasner's notes of gates where people can enter immediately that sound a bit like portals. I'm guessing Urithiru is maybe another realm like Shadesmar, and also like the hot springs that Rock mentioned in the last chapter. Later, Shyllan gets ready to meet Adolin, and on the way in the carriage, she practices her light weaving. She finds if she sketches the image she wants to weave first, she can focus on it and produce the light weaving better. She also realizes she can breathe the illusion back in and reclaim the Stormlight. I can't wait to see these various abilities being used in more intense scenes later on. I can already imagine them being so incredible. Chapter 48 is a Shyllan flashback, 3 years ago. Shyllan is talking with her brothers, discussing her art and her wit. I really love their relationship. After this, her brother Jushu is pleading with her dad to pay off his debts to the debt collectors, but his dad refuses, saying it's his own fault for gambling. Shyllan asks her dad to help, but he refuses. Shyllan then goes to the debt collectors and gives them things that may compensate for the debt. It's not enough, but Shyllan convinces the men to let her brother go. Once at home, her dad beats one of the maids really badly and tells Shyllan he never hit her, but that he'd take his anger out on someone else every time she disobeys him. In this chapter, Shyllan also has poison leaves that her brother Wickham gave her to destroy. I'm guessing these are what she uses to kill her dad. Chapter 49 is Shyllan's date with Adolin. They both get along pretty well, and to Shyllan's surprise, he likes her the way she is, so she doesn't really need to try as hard to court him. Even when the conversation went to defecating in Shardplate, they enjoyed each other's company. Their conversation then went to some more serious places with the Chasm Fiends. Shyllan suggests they may be hunting them to extinction, and that they should try and breed them. He even tells her about Dalinar and his visions, and how he wants to refound the Night's Radiant, which brings a chill to Shyllan. She tells him about the Parshmen being Voidbringers, but says she needs to speak to Navani about it. It ends with a high storm, and the two of them get protection. At the end, Adolin says he tried and helped, get her to come further into the Shattered Plains to research chasm fiends. Chapter 50 starts with Adolin sheltering from the high storm. He meets Sadius, who tries to persuade Adolin to try and understand his reasoning, to get him on his side it seems, but obviously it doesn't go well. Adolin just really wants to kill him as soon as possible. He then leaves and finds Bridge 4 around a new set of glyphs that say, in 32 days, seek the center. When Dalinar and Navani arrive, they figure out these markings are made by Dalinar during his vision. They then discuss journeying to the center of the Shattered Plains. At the start of chapter 51, Adolin tells Dalinar that he'll go to meet with the Parshandi and not Dalinar. He says it's too much of a risk for his dad to go there. Then we get the meeting between Eshonai and Adolin, wearing Dalinar's old shard plate, pretending to be him. The meeting doesn't really go well. Eshonai has changed completely and says it will end with one of their sides destroyed. She hints that they've done something that will change the tide of the war. Adolin goes back and Dalinar explains they need to take as many people as they possibly can and destroy the Parshandi once and for all. This was honestly so heartbreaking. Things were getting so close to going peacefully, but now it sounds like there'll be full-on destruction. Dalinar and the others plan to destroy the Parshandi before the countdown ends towards the Everstorm, and I'm guessing that maybe the Parshandi made a few more storm forms in the recent high storm. Hello and welcome to another video. So you're probably already noticing that this video is a little different to my usual videos, and that's because you can see my face. The reason I'm changing things up a little bit for this series is because the method of making the older videos, part 1 and part 2 of this series, took a really long time to edit and upload for you guys. So I thought this way it may be easier for me to compile the videos together. And I also thought it might be a bit better for you to watch to see my genuine first-time reactions after reading every chapter. I guess I'll go back to where I left off in the last video, and you'll see my reactions for the rest of the chapters in Words of Radiance. So in chapter 52, we go back and forth between Shyllan and Kaladin as Kaladin trains his lashing abilities and Shyllan tries to infiltrate Amaram's camp to find his secret room. One thing I really loved about this chapter was how it's structured. It jumps back and forth between Kaladin training and Shyllan on her mission, and it kind of really feels like one of those montages you see in movies where there's like a heist or an action scene or something where it jumps between two things happening at once, and I thought it was like a really cool and like cinematic way to structure this chapter. Shyllan ends up finding out a few different things about Amaram. He's using glyphs phonetically to kind of use them to write script, and that he might be wanting to bring about the Voidbringers. We also find out later on that Amaram actually has a shard blade that's the exact same one that Shyllan's brother Helaran had, and upon further questioning, Shyllan finds out that Amaram is the one who killed her brother. So that kind of changes things a lot, and it kind of puts Kaladin and Shyllan on the same side. So I feel like this will probably be the thing that gets them to become like on the same team kind of. At the end of the chapter, after Kaladin's training, he finds Shen in his room, and Shen tells him that he wants to leave, which is kind of strange to Kaladin. But of course he lets him go because he tells Shen that he's not a slave. But what I'm guessing this means is that the Voidbringers are probably going to come soon. Like Shen might know that it's going to happen, and he probably doesn't want to hurt Kaladin or anybody else that's been nice to him. I'm guessing things are about to ramp up. Maybe it's something got to do with Eshonai becoming a storm form, so who knows. But anyway, let's go to the next chapter. In chapter 53, Adolin is fighting another duel, and the way he wins against his opponent is by cracking his shard plate in various places until all the stormlight leaks out and he can't move anymore, and Adolin only has to push him over to win the duel. Afterwards, he meets up with Shyllan, who tells him she has an idea for a way to help with his duels. And after that, somebody storms into his place, Relis, and says that Adolin wasn't fighting properly. But then during this argument, Adolin offers 6 shards of his to fight against Relis and another opponent, so 2 against 1, and he's really hoping that Shyllan will be able to help him with this, with that idea she had earlier. So in chapter 54, Chilan meets with the Ghost Bloods to give the information she found about Amaran, and she goes disguised as Vale, a dark-eyed woman, and during giving the information, she accidentally reveals that she can draw things from memory, and even though this impresses Mraize, the leader of the Ghost Bloods, she knows she's kind of made a mistake here. And Mraize also figures out that Shyllan, or well, the disguise, Vale, has killed Tin. So when Shyllan leaves, she knows that something could happen considering she can draw any of those people from memory, so she light weaves a boulder and she hides inside it and sends off her carriage. And then later on she goes to the carriage and she finds out that it's been burned, and the coachman's throat has been slit. Obviously she blames herself for this because she knew that she could have been in danger, but she didn't give that information to the coachman. But by the end she also kind of realizes that this kind of proves what kind of man Reyes is. In chapter 55, Kaladin goes to guard Adolin as he meets with Shyllan. Along the way they meet Wit, who apparently Shyllan has met since she goes to hug him straight away. And I don't actually recall them meeting, so maybe it's something I've forgotten. But anyway, Shyllan tells Adolin that a way that he can get Sadius to duel him is by using the right of challenge. So I think Adolin plans to do this after his duel with the two opponents, and then he's going to ask the king for a right to challenge Sadius. So then after this, Kaladin follows Adolin and Shyllan as they carry on their date, and during this you can clearly tell that Kaladin doesn't like hearing them, be so happy and stuff, which is just because he's like so miserable. And then we see Dalinar arrive, and he's with Amaram, and he announces that he's gonna refound the Knights Radiant, that Amaram is the first one to speak the words, and that he's gonna be the head of the Knights Radiant. So that was like a crazy twist, and I can't really wait to see what it's going to mean for Kaladin and Shyllan, because now that we know that he's the one who killed Shyllan's brother, and is kind of the reason that Kaladin's brother's dead as well. So maybe this will be the thing that will get Shyllan and Adolin to kind of talk to each other about it. But since Amaram's actually said the words now, does that mean he's like a surge binder like the rest? Does he have a spren? I don't know. In chapter 56 is Adolin's duel, but instead of it being against two opponents like he thought, it's actually against 4. And the reason for that is because when Adolin actually offered the duel, he never said against 2 opponents. He just said, bring as many people as you want. So he's now fighting against 4 people. But the thing is, the rules say that Adolin can still fight and get help from other people as long as he's at a disadvantage. So as the fight goes on, Adolin clearly is losing. And even when he's trying to surrender, the 3 people are just attacking him really badly, so he can't even surrender. One of the people he's fighting against is actually his friend Yakima that we met before. So during the duel, Dalinar's like going crazy. He's like, I need to go in there and fight. But Sadius really wants him to go down there as well. So it kind of seems like Sadius has planned for Dalinar to go down there so he can get killed. But during all this argument, Renarin ends up going into the arena. So it's Adolin and Renarin against 4 other people. And Renarin ends up having a fit. So Dalinar's going insane trying to find someone to go in there and fight. And that's when Kaladin shows up and says that he's going to fight. Now, the chapter ends there. But I kind of think that what's going to happen is, if I had to make like a prediction for what's going to happen next, I think Kaladin's going to go in there and win the fight. And when he's going to do the right of challenge, he's not going to challenge Sadius, he's going to challenge Amaram. Because at the beginning of this chapter, we see Kaladin talking about Amaram, wondering if he's a surge binder or not. So even if he's not going to kill him, maybe this will be a way to test if Amaram's actually a surge binder or not. Maybe it's going to be the moment that Kaladin's going to show his abilities. So maybe that could happen. If that does happen, that'd be really cool, because at this point I kind of just want Amaram to die now, because he's getting in the way of Dalinar and Kaladin, because Dalinar really sees Amaram as someone who's on his side, but from what we know of what he's done to Shyllan and Kaladin, he's really not. So hopefully it does end that way, but we'll see in the next chapter. Just finished chapter 57, and it's probably my favourite chapter so far. So Kaladin goes into the arena, and it's him, Adolin and Renarin against the other 4 Shardbearers. And of course Renarin can't do much, but Kaladin kind of saves them with just his spear. And it's just, I'm not going to go into detail about what exactly happened with the action, but I will tell you it was all just so good. I can imagine this chapter being in my top 10 moments for Words of Radiance, the way I did my top 10 video for the Way of Kings. At the end of the chapter, Elhokar offers both Adolin and Kaladin the right to challenge whoever they want. And Adolin obviously chooses Sadius, but then, like I said in the last chapter, that Kaladin's gonna challenge Amaram, and that's exactly what happened. But not only that, but Kaladin actually admits exactly what Amaram did, and he calls him a murderer. And the reaction to that is like, everyone's completely stunned by it, like everyone's silent. And then Elhokar says to arrest Kaladin. So I don't know where that's gonna go, if we're actually gonna get to see the duel, but now Amaram has recognized that Kaladin's there, and Kaladin's admitted what he thinks about everything. And now I'm going to wonder what Dalinar's going to say, because Dalinar actually looked to Amaram to help Adolin in the duel, but he didn't do it. He didn't help. He just stared at him. And Kaladin was actually in there saving his son's lives. So will Dalinar be on Elhokar's side and let Kaladin be arrested? Or is he going to kind of listen to Kaladin now and let the challenge happen? But yeah. Also, another little thing that happened in this chapter was Shyllan used Patton to distract the guy who was attacking Renarin, and I think Syl might have seen Patton, so maybe that's going to lead to something as well. Chapter 58 is the last chapter of part 3. In this chapter, we see the aftermath of the duel between Adolin, Kaladin and Renarin and the 4 Shardbearers. So, Kaladin is being sent to prison, and Elhokar and Dalinar are arguing about it, because Dalinar is actually coming to Kaladin's defense, saying pretty much that he saved his son's lives and that he shouldn't be punished that badly for it. So during this argument, Elhokar actually wants an execution for Kaladin, but Dalinar kind of stops that, and they kind of deal with Kaladin being sent to prison instead. Kaladin does talk to Dalinar about Amaram, saying that everything that Kaladin's saying about Amaram is true, but Dalinar tells him that it can't be true, that Dalinar's looked into it, and that everything he's found has said that Amaram's Shardblade was won 4 months ago in front of 17 people who've all witnessed what happened. Now, I'm guessing what happened is that Amaram probably has 2 Shardblades, or something happened with the one that Kaladin fought for him, and then 4 months ago is the one that he won from Shyllan's brother. Kaladin is now back in a cage, and at the end of the chapter he's saying how he's not going to trust Light Eyes ever again, which is kind of annoying because he was just about to trust Dalinar, and I kind of hope that he does kind of stay like close with Dalinar and Adolin and stuff. Maybe Adolin, Dalinar and Renarin are going to find some way of saving Kaladin or breaking him free or something like that, and hopefully that will kind of lift Kaladin's spirits up a bit and make him not see that Light Eyes are all that bad, but I don't know how it's going to happen with him. In this chapter we also see Sadius' perspective for a bit, and we see that he, like, after what happened in the arena, he's kind of freaked. He didn't expect Dalinar to be this close to, getting him in a tough situation. Sadius tells his wife that they need to prepare now, and that he wants her to prepare the assassins that she's planted. So I don't know who these assassins are. It could be people we've already heard of from now and again, but I guess we're going to see a lot more crazy stuff happen in the next part. In the 9th interlude, we're introduced to Lift. Her personality is kind of like very confident, and the vibe I got from her was very much like Toph from Avatar. She's also got a spren who's made of vines, and her abilities are gliding, which means she can make parts of her body like slick, which means that she can glide through surfaces, and like if people try to grab her, she'll slip through their fingers. And her other ability is like regrowth, which means that she can kind of heal people and resurrect them as well. In this chapter, she's on a thieving mission with a bunch of people in Azir, and the situation in Azir so far is that the leader has been killed by Szeth, and the viziers are choosing a new person to rule. So while on this mission, the man who killed the healer from an interlude we had before is here as well, and he is trying to kill Lift. So the reason he says that he's trying to kill her is that he's trying to kill all the people with radiant abilities, because he thinks that if they do bad with them, they'll bring about the desolations, and he's just trying to stop that. So he asks the viziers to allow him to kill her because she's a thief, and then he goes after her and tries to kill her. But during this time, one of Lift's partners is killed, and she uses her regrowth abilities on him and resurrects him. So just as that man who Lift calls Darkness is about to kill her, the boy she resurrects ends up being named the new ruler of Azir, because the viziers think that if he can resurrect himself, maybe he'll be able to withstand the attacks from Szeth. So since he's become the new ruler, or as they call it, the Prime, he actually pardons Lift, so Darkness lets her go. By the end of the chapter, her partner becomes the new ruler of Azir, and Lift is going to be there to kind of help him, I guess. And another thing in this chapter, it mentions that Lift is an edge dancer, which is the name of the kind of people with her abilities. I'm sure I've heard like a book of Brandon Sanderson's that's called Edge Dancer. I need to look it up probably, but I don't know if that's set in this same world or if that's a separate kind of universe that's just about edge dancers. But that's like the second kind of connection I've seen so far to another one of his books. In the 10th interlude, we're finally getting a perspective for Szeth, who I don't think we've actually had a perspective for so far in this book. So he's actually in Uruthuru on a tower that's like the tallest tower in the world, and he's contemplating all the people he's killed and that kind of stuff. But he's also really worried about the fact that Radiance have returned, because it turns out he was actually banished and made truthless because he was wrong about the Radiance and the Voidbringers. But now that he's right, he's kind of wondering what it's all for, and why he's had the life that he's had. So at the end of the chapter, he says he's going to go off to find some answers, but it also says that he might go to kill someone, like of his own choice this time. I don't know exactly what that means, that he wants to kill someone of his own choice. I hope it doesn't mean that he's kind of like turning villainous or anything, but I guess we'll see. In the 11th interlude, we're with Ashonai again and with the Parshandi. And from what we see from Ashonai, even though I know she's changed already, she's like completely changed now. She's already transformed like 200 of her soldiers into storm form. She plans on doing a lot more. She asks the 5 to do this, but they refuse her. So then later on, she actually speaks to the crowds herself and convinces them to disobey the 5 and listen to her, and asks them if they want to become storm form, and most of them do. But then after this, she says she wants to transform the civilians who want to be storm form as well. So when she does this, the people who say they don't want to transform, which includes her own mum, she says will eventually be killed after everyone else has been turned into storm form. She gathers all the people who don't want to change in a certain place, but then they all escape, and Ashonai says it doesn't matter, they'll all die anyway, which includes her own mum. And then later on, she actually threatens her own sister to kill her, but then her sister says that she's the only one who can bring the Spren to transform them into storm form, so she leaves her alone. She also kind of says that after the humans have been dealt with, she's going to reinstate the 5, but she's lying about that. She's going to actually kill the humans and take all power for herself. And she's even kind of like judging which type of people should be storm form, because she doesn't want anyone to overthrow her. She wants like complete power now. And another thing I was thinking while reading this chapter is that the humans are completely screwed. Like, I don't see them winning this war at all. And this whole stuff that's happening with Sadius, I don't think any of that's going to matter after this battle that's going to happen. I'm guessing it's going to happen at the end of the book. That's going to be the big, explosive end to this book. It's going to be the battle against the Parshandi. So in chapter 59, we're with Kaladin in the prison cell. And while he's contemplating things about Dalinar and questioning whether he actually likes him or not, which turns out he does still think Dalinar is different to the others. He's not really happy about being in the prison. A wit turns up and he's got an instrument, and it turns out he's got another song for him like he did in the last book. And in this chapter, it's not really like a story like he did in the last book. It's just a song, which it turns out as he goes on along the song, Kaladin butts in asking about what things are going to happen in the song, and wit actually changes the story depending on what Kaladin says. So I don't really understand completely what the meaning of the song was. It was pretty much a man running away from High Storm, and at the end it depends. Kaladin asks whether he died or whether he lived. Wit says that depends on you, Kaladin, whether you think he died or not. So yeah, I don't really know exactly what it meant for Kaladin, but Wit does tell Kaladin to think about it at the end of the chapter. Another thing I liked about this chapter was there was one moment where Wit was about to tell the story, and he actually mentions bunny rabbits and chicks, and Kaladin doesn't really understand what he's talking about because those kind of animals aren't in this world. And I think I've heard somewhere, or I don't know if it was in the book, in the last book or not, but I think I know that Wit is someone who hops around different worlds. Maybe that was like a different world, or maybe it's our world, who knows, that Wit was referencing. And if you know that and you read it, kind of the way he describes, okay fine, if it's not bunny rabbits, then it's this disgusting looking slime and some crab or something like that. You can kind of tell that he's seen all these worlds, and that's just how his representation of this world is. So that was pretty funny, I like that. In chapter 60, we're with Shyllan, who's going over Amaram's notes to try and find out where Uruthuru is. And during this chapter, she's talking to Patton, and Patton mentions how she needs to accept the memories that she's trying to hide away from herself from her childhood. And even though we don't know what those are yet, she does say that she can't accept it, and she kind of makes a light-weaving projection of herself, saying that that's what I'd be if I faced those memories, which is like herself at the current age, but kind of the way we read about her in the flashbacks, like really scared to talk and really quiet and kind of depressed. So it doesn't sound like she's ready to accept it, but we don't even know what those memories are yet, so we'll have to find those out in the flashbacks. After this, she actually tries another technique with her light weaving by actually making a projection and attaching it to Patton to make him not only invisible, but so that if he moves, projection moves with him. So she could actually make herself look like a different person, but she could actually make Patton look like a different person as well. So that could be cool to see what she could do with that later on. In chapter 61, we get a short flashback of Shyllan's, and it's like a really tense one, even though it's really short. So Nan Bala is asking his dad if he can marry the girl that Shyllan got him together with, and his dad says no, saying that she's like below their station, and that he needs to marry someone with a higher social status, so that it'll be good politically for the family. Now after that, they get into a bit of an argument, and Nan Bala mentions that he's been talking to and meeting Helaran, their older brother. And after this, Shyllan overhears her dad ordering the assassination of his son Helleran. And of course Shylana thinks that she needs to find a way to stop this, and then even the stepmom, who we've barely seen so far, actually stands up to her husband and says that you can't kill your own son, that's just too far. And I guess we're kind of seeing this family kind of crumble, even though this family is already in such a bad state. I guess through these flashbacks we're going to see them crumble even further. And I also wanted to say that Nan Bala, even though we've barely seen anything of him, he's like, something about him makes him like a really intriguing character to me, because he has some moments where he seems kind of dark and a bit like his dad, but then he also has like vulnerable moments which makes me like him a lot. So I can't wait until he becomes more of a major character or even just appears in Shallan's story. Chapter 62 was actually one of my favourite chapters, even though it's a kind of a simple chapter. So Kaladin is in his prison and Dalinar comes to meet him, and they have a conversation about what he's going to be doing next and how they're going to control the situation pretty much. Kaladin tells Dalinar how he feels about Elhokar and everything that's happened, and well, he also mentions what Moash said about Moash's grandparents and how they died in a prison cell. And Dalinar knows this and says that it was actually Roshan, who we read about in the first book, who's the man who actually sent Kaladin's little brother to the army and pretty much led to Kaladin's brother's death. Dalinar says it was Roshan who kind of convinced Elhokar into doing what happened with Moash's grandparents. Turns out the punishment for Roshan for what he did to Moash's grandparents was going to be something more severe, but Elhokar kind of wanted it to be less severe because he was kind of a friend of his, and Elhokar's the one who sent Roshan to Kaladin. So in a way, Elhokar's the one who started Kaladin's whole journey of misery. We also get a little bit of Dalinar telling Kaladin why he actually chose Kaladin, which is that he trusts Kaladin to be someone who actually is going to help him in the coming months or coming years of all this crazy stuff that Dalinar knows is going to happen. But he also tells Kaladin that if Kaladin wants respect and wants more respect for dark-eyed people, he shouldn't be acting like a lunatic, shouting about wanting a duel with a high prince or anything. He should actually, be a bit more calm and more like, proper with the way he's talking to people. Pretty much Dalinar tells Kaladin that he should act in a way that makes Elhokar think that dark-eyed people can be trusted with high position roles. But by the end of the chapter, Kaladin, even though he had that good conversation with Dalinar, all he's really thinking about is how Elhokar's the reason behind everything bad that's happened to him. And well, Kaladin comes to the decision at the end that Elhokar does need to die, because Dalinar's someone who does do the right thing, and he should be in charge and not be, limited by what Elhokar allows him to do. In chapter 63 and 64, Shyllan is sent on a mission with the Ghostbloods, specifically one member of the Ghostbloods, the one with the mask we saw before. I don't think I've mentioned her, but her name's Ayatil, and she's always wearing a mask and never takes it off, and she's always right beside Mraize when Shyllan has meetings with the Ghostbloods. The mission they go on is to find a madman that Dalinar had kept in a prison that Dalinar had kept. When Shyllan finds him is Taln, the herald that we met at the end of the last book and earlier in this book. After seeing him and after he gives her the same kind of, mysterious ramblings that he did before, Shyllan decides to leave and she tries to lightweave a disguise for herself, but when she's about to do it, he grabs her and holds her and says that she's one of the knights. She doesn't pay much attention to that, but then before she's about to leave, she sees Amaram coming to the same room. So she hides in the corner of that room, disguising herself as just like a shadow, and she hears Amaram tell the herald to talk of the cache of shard blades that he spoke of earlier, and apparently Amaram believes it's true, and Amaram is going to try and find the area where the herald spoke of the shard blades. Apparently it's a huge cache of shard blades. So if he does find it, I don't know what's going to happen. Is he going to keep it? Is he going to help Dalinar with it? Is he going to help Sadius with it? I have no idea. But then after that, Shyllan leaves and she tells the Ghostbloods of what happened, and she's given a span read message from the Ghostbloods, from Mraize, saying that she's proven herself and that she shouldn't fear her life from any of the Ghostblood members, and that she needs to get a tattoo, and that she's pretty much joined them, that she's one of the Ghostbloods now. In chapter 65, we have another Shyllan flashback that's only 1.5 years ago. So in this chapter, it's just after her dad's ordered the assassination of Helleran, and Shyllan goes around talking to Nan Bala, telling him that he should find their stepmom and escape to find Helleran so that they're safe from her dad, who she thinks is just going off the deep end and he's gonna do some crazy stuff. So Shyllan tells Nan Bala about this, and then he agrees, and then she goes to speak to her stepmom, and her stepmom is beaten up. She's got a bloodied lip, a broken arm. She's kind of like annoyed at Shyllan because she says that you're the only one that he spares, you're the only one he doesn't hate. And then at the end of the chapter, when she tells her you should just run away, she says, if I'm gone and if Nan Balak's gone, then who else will be left for him to hate? And then she says, maybe finally it'll be you, the one who actually deserves it. So I made a prediction in like the first flashback that Shyllan accidentally ended up killing her mum. Back then, after reading other chapters, I thought maybe I was like crazily wrong about that. But now it's starting to sound like that's pretty much kind of what happened. But I guess we'll see exactly what happened. But Shyllan also still sees her mother's soul in that box, the light, so we still have to find out what that is as well. In chapter 66, Kaladin is freed from his prison. Just before he's released, he's kind of contemplating his thoughts and he's in like a really dark place. He's saying that even after he's been freed, he's never going to let himself be imprisoned like this again, saying that he'd rather die, which means that even if a king like Elhokar puts him in prison, he won't go into the prison cell. He'll kill a king. Then he's set free, and on the way out, he sees there's another cell near his where Adolin has been in. So it turns out Adolin's decided to stay in a prison cell just as long as Kaladin was in a prison cell. The reason for this is because obviously Kaladin saved both his and Renarin's lives by stepping into the dueling arena. And when Kaladin sees this, he's like completely shocked. And we're pretty much seeing the beginnings of their friendship. So like I've been saying throughout that, you know, I bet they're going to become really good friends. And it seems like that's exactly what's happening. After that, Kaladin goes out and he sees Bridgefour are waiting for him. It's a huge celebration. They're all cheering for him. And Kaladin says that all the darkness that was in him fades away. And that made me really happy because I was scared that Kaladin was about to go back into like a really dark place, but he's kind of been brought back out. And I guess in a way this is kind of the first big moment that Kaladin's kind of like, you know, becoming less miserable. And then after that, Adolin talks about all the shard blades they'd won, and he says there's a whole set of shard plate and shard blade that he saved for Kaladin, pretty much offering him the chance to become a Light Eyes. Kaladin starts to panic and he says that he's not gonna accept, which he tells Adolin is that he doesn't want to become somebody to be respected or a Light Eyes by taking the shard plate and actually becoming a Light Eye. He wants all the people like him, all the Dark Eyes, to have the same level of respect, which is very honourable, which we know of Kaladin. So then Kaladin says that he's going to give his shard plate and shard blade to Moash, who then becomes a Light Eyes. After this, Cal speaks to Moash in private and says that he's agreeing with the mission to kill Elhokar, saying that he's agreeing with Graves and all the other people who want Elhokar to die so Dalinar can take over. This is the thing that I feel like if it goes wrong, it could ruin everything. I guess I understand Kaladin's point of view that if Elhokar dies, then the kingdom would be in a better place because Dalinar is definitely better at the job than Elhokar. But still, like, Kaladin needs to build that relationship with Dalinar, or well, I want him to build that relationship with Dalinar and Adolin and Renarin as well. I feel like if he kills their family member or the only son of Dalinar's brother and they find out that Kaladin was responsible, I feel like it's going to break things in a way that they'll never be fixed. So even though I kind of would like to see it happen, I don't want to see it happen. But yeah, this was actually a really good chapter. I like this chapter a lot. I wouldn't say it's like one of the best chapters. Actually, I wouldn't mind saying it's one of the best chapters in the book because I feel like it's a big turning point internally for Kaladin. So in that sense, I do really like this chapter. But yeah, next up is the Dalinar chapter, which I'm excited about because we've barely had any Dalinar chapters so far. Before getting into chapter 67, I should mention that in the previous chapter, there was a little conversation between Adolin and Kaladin, where Kaladin talks about what he said about Amaram. Turns out Adolin actually believes Kaladin about the whole Amaram situation. But anyway, in chapter 67, Dalinar is at a feast and everyone's kind of like laughing at him behind his back, and it turns out there's a bunch of papers being passed around which are Navani's documentations of Dalinar's visions. So they're not just the exact documentations that Navani wrote, but they've been altered to make fun of his visions. So even though everyone's kind of like laughing at him and it seems like it's really bad for his situation, he actually speaks up to them and says that, yes, I've been having these visions and these accounts aren't actually completely accurate, even though the visions are true. But he says then that every high storm that happens, he's going to publish everything that he sees so that other scholars can look into his visions and help. And after this, he actually talks to Wit for a bit, and they have a bit of a mysterious kind of conversation where Wit at the end says that he's helping Dalinar in this situation, but that his job is something that's more dangerous than he knows and it's bigger than he knows, and that if he gets caught, then somebody's going to come after him and shatter his soul into pieces or something. And when Dalinar asks who this person is, Wit just says that it's the same person Dalinar's fighting, the father of hatred. I think it says that. The father of hatred, yeah. So yeah, that's where the chapter ends. So I think Dalinar is also kind of preparing to scout the Shattered Plains to prepare the fight against the Parshandi, and he's also looking for allies to do that with as well. In chapter 68, Kaladin is with Dalinar, Adolin and Shyllan in the Shattered Plains, and they've gone for Shyllan to find a Chasm Fiend to draw, and also for Dalinar to kind of scout the area in preparation for his expedition to defeat the Parshandi pretty much. So at the start of this chapter, Kaladin tries to take Stormlight out of his sphere, but he can't do it until Syl comes over, and he questions why this is happening, and she pretty much says that his bond with her is kind of fading because he's not being as honourable as he was before, and that he also needs to find the new words. So Kaladin talks to her about it, and it's because of his decision to help Moash to kill Elokar that this is happening really. And he ends up in a situation because he's given Moash his word that he's going to help defeat Elokar, but he's also given Dalinar his word that he's going to protect Elokar. So it's kind of a muddy situation, and he's just going to try to think of a way to kind of find a way through it. And I think the way that it's probably going to be handled is that Kaladin's going to have to find a way to get Dalinar to become king without having to kill Elokar. So if he finds a way to do that, I feel like that might be the best situation. After this, Kaladin talks to Adolin for a bit, and they have a bit of a friendly chat, but Kaladin is still a bit, confrontational a little bit towards Adolin. And then Chilan comes over and she kind of confronts Kaladin about how Adolin's being really nice to Kaladin, but Kaladin isn't seeing it because he's like just this miserable person who hates everyone. And even though Kaladin kind of defends himself in that situation, I think deep down he does know that he's kind of being too miserable and cynical and pessimistic about this whole situation. But then after that, at the end of the chapter, Kaladin sees like one of the carpenters from Sadius's camp. He goes after him, and then like other stuff starts to happen. Dalina sees somebody else, and then while Kaladin's chasing that carpenter, he goes on a bridge, but the bridge collapses. And we also hear that the horns are being called because the enemy's here or something. So I'm guessing that it's not the Parshandi or anything. I think it's Sadius knew this was happening, and he's kind of like, I don't know, I'm gonna have to read the next chapter, but it sounds to me like Sadius is doing something crazy now because Dalinar and the rest of them are in a bit of a vulnerable situation. So yeah, let me get to the next chapter and find out what happens next. Okay, so in chapter 69, it turns out I was wrong about before. It's not just Kaladin who fell into the chasm. It was Kaladin, Shyllan, and I think some other soldiers. And Kaladin and Shyllan are the only ones who survived, so they find each other in the chasms. Both of them, we see perspectives from both of them in this chapter, and they both think they're the ones who saved the other with Stormlight. So that was pretty funny. While in the chasms, they kind of discuss stuff, how they're going to get out and things like that. But then they end up starting to argue, and the argument turns into Kaladin saying that Shyllan abuses her power as a Light Eyes person, and then Shyllan defending herself, and Kaladin mentions the shoes that she took from him, and she can't really deny that. She says that, yeah, that was because, that was like an abuse of her power. But she still does defend herself and say that Kaladin is still somewhat responsible for the way he is, and saying that it's not just Light Eyes who've done everything wrong to him. He is kind of playing a part in why he's the way he is. But after all this arguing, they start hearing scratches in the walls of the chasms. So pretty much a chasm fiend's come and found them. And at the end of the chapter, they run. Before getting to the next chapter, there's also something else that happened in this chapter, was that while Kaladin was falling, he heard Syl screaming, and it's the same scream he heard when in the duel against the 4 Shardbearers, he touched the shard blade, and then he heard a scream there as well, the same scream. And that made me think of a connection between the shard blades and the spren. And then I thought maybe, it's just a theory, but I thought maybe the shard blades are kind of made out of spren somehow. I don't know how that would work, but because if you think about it, the people who have shard blades, they need to bond with them the same way Kaladin needs to bond with Syl. And you also hear about how Syl thinks the shard blades are evil. So maybe the shard blades are made out of spren, and it's you have to sacrifice the spren to create them, which is why Syl hates them so much. But then I think it might not be that, because Patton's with Shylana and she has a shard blade, and I don't think he's mentioned anything like that. But that did sound kind of right to me. I'm sure there's some sort of connection between shard blades and spren, that we'll find out about later. In chapter 70, Shyllan and Kaladin are still in the chasms. They try to sneak around to not be found by the chasm fiend, but then Shyllan really wants to have a look at it, so they kind of find a way to sneak up on it, and Shyllan makes a memory of it. So then after that, they try to find a way out, and it's taking them a long time, so they have to spend the night there and keep trying to find the way that leads back to home. This chapter was mostly about Kaladin and Shyllan just talking, so they kind of confront the fact what Kaladin thinks of her and how he thought she was an assassin, and he questions her motives of why she's there and stuff, and she tells him the truth pretty much. She doesn't go into full details, but she does say that she's there because of Yasna, she's trying to prevent a disaster. At the end of this chapter, Shyllan makes a vow to Kaladin that she's being sincere and that the reasons she's told him are the reasons she's actually there, and that she's not going to harm Adolin or anybody else in his family. This chapter brings us about 3/4 of the way into the book, and I stop a video after every quarter of the book I've read, and I've only got a quarter of the book left to read. And from what I know of the last book, the ending is where everything goes crazy. I mean, to be honest, I even know that from Mistborn, because I remember in that book, it does have great moments throughout, but the ending is where everything kind of like picks up a lot. And even though I said before that this book is a lot more balanced in its highs and lows throughout compared to the first one, I still kind of suspect that something crazy is going to happen in the last quarter of this book. Okay, so in chapter 71, quite a lot happens. At the start, we're with Teft and Sigzil as they're waiting for Kaladin to come back out of the chasms. They're talking about how there's a high storm coming, and they also talk about Teft's relationships with his parents and the cult that he was part of, the Invisors, I think. And he kind of mentions how they were really wanting to bring about the Knights Radiant, and the way they would do it is by kind of trying to shock the powers out of people, so using torture or near-death experiences. And I think Teft actually, both his parents did this, and I think they both died doing this as well. And then what Teft did was since he thought what they were doing was so wrong, he actually told on them and got them all executed, which he's not happy about, but that's what happened. After this, we go to Kaladin and Shyllan in the chasms, and while they're walking around, Kaladin reveals that he knows that the chasms are symmetrical in the way they're shaped. And when Shyllan hears this, she kind of realizes that the Shattered Plains are actually the remnants of a city, and like I'm guessing the chasms were man-made since they're symmetrical. And she also says, considering they're symmetrical, there's probably a center. So she says that we're going to try to go to the center. But then also she kind of says that she wants to get out as soon as possible, because her being the only one with this information, she needs to go out and tell someone about it. But then while they carry on walking in the chasms, they start talking, and Kaladin kind of mentions how Shyllan always has this optimistic nature. She thinks at first he's annoyed by it or something, but then he says that he wishes he was like that. And then she says, you wish everyone wasn't like you in having experienced the horrible things you have. But then she keeps talking about it, and she says she kind of hints at how she's also had terrible experiences just like Kaladin, like talking about knowing people that have died around her, wishing that she was the one who'd been killed instead. And after this, Kaladin realizes that Shyllan's not so different to him. But then he sees her smile, and then he actually says it's the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. For the last few chapters, or even near the beginning of their meeting, I did always get a little hint that there's some sort of romantic kind of thing happening between Kaladin and Shyllan. I hoped it wouldn't happen, because I like the idea of Shyllan and Adolin getting together, but the way things are going, it does kind of sound like Kaladin is kind of falling in love with Shyllan. But anyway, after this, as they carry on walking, they see that the chasm fiend's been following them. They accidentally run into it. Then obviously it chases them and they try to get away from it. Kaladin puts Shyllan and himself in like a crack in the wall, but then the chasm fiend tries to get his claws in there. It can't get them yet, but Kaladin knows that he has to go out there and fight it off, so that Shyllan can go out there and tell Dalinar what she needs to tell him. But Shyllan really doesn't want him to go. She says, you'll be killed if you go out there. But then he doesn't, listen. He says that he's gonna definitely go out there and fight the chasm fiend. So then Shyllan says that if you do go out there, then you can't go out there without this. And then she summons a shard blade and gives it to him. And that's where the chapter ends. So I don't know really what to say about this chapter. It was a really good chapter. I mean, my favourite moment was probably the whole Kaladin and Shyllan kind of connecting. And I'm actually realising that Kaladin's story is, more than any other character, is about meeting all these other characters. Because I think they're shaping his kind of internal sense of who he is. First I thought it was going to be Dalinar that's going to make him feel more confident or more valid in his honor or something. But now it's actually not just Adolin that he's met who's kind of helped him grow, but also Shyllan now. So that's one thing I've noticed about Kaladin's journey, is that meeting all these separate characters is what's kind of helping him grow internally. At the start of chapter 72, Kaladin is taking the shard blade from Shyllan. He does ask why she has it, but she tells him that it's not really the time to ask those questions. So Kaladin takes it and he fights the Chasm Fiend. During the fight, Kaladin really hurts his leg and he's about to lose, but then he sees Shyllan distracting the Chasm Fiend for him to, defeat it. And then later on he also sees another version of himself around distracting the Chasm Fiend for him to eventually kill it. So he actually thinks that this is, we obviously know it's Shyllan, but he thinks it's actually him doing the powers and he doesn't know how he's doing it. But then after he's killed the Chasm Fiend, it happens in the coolest way. So the Chasm Fiend's literally about to eat him, so it's about to eat him from above, and he thrusts the shard blade up into his mouth and kills it that way. So after that, Shyllan has to kind of cut her way into the Chasm Fiend to get to Kaladin, and then she saves him. Then the issue becomes the High Storm. So they look above and they see on the chasm walls where they can see the erosion of the rainwater to see where the high storms usually flood the chasms up until. So they think of a way to kind of survive the high storm by climbing the Chasm Fiend, the dead Chasm Fiend, and using the shard blade to cut a little cubby in the side of the wall where they know the water is not going to flood them, so they can stay in there until the high storm's over. So that's what they do. Shyllan helps Kaladin to find his way up there, even though he's got a really badly hurt leg. And at the end of the chapter, we read that the high storm comes. Another little thing that happens in this chapter is Kaladin, when he touches the shard blade, he doesn't hear the scream that he usually does. So this also kind of proves to him that Syl is nowhere to be found. Something's wrong with his bond with Syl. Now I'm guessing that after this whole thing happening with Shyllan, Syl's going to come back, because I think he's being honourable right now with Shyllan. The stuff he said about Adolin in these chapters, the way he's kind of stopped being so suspicious and angry towards Shyllan, and how he's still risking his life to save other people. Hopefully maybe at the end of the chapter he's going to realise that he doesn't want to go along with Moash's plan, and that maybe that way Syl will come back, but I guess we'll see about that. So in chapter 73 we get another flashback of Shyllan's, which takes place a year before the current time. So in this chapter we actually see the end of what we knew was going to happen with her story in the past. So we see the death of her father. So the way it all plays out is that Shyllan and Bala are planning on his escape with their stepmom and Aelita, and Shyllan and Bala, while they're about to plan to do it, they realise that Aelita, who's Balat's betrothed, or who he wants to marry, ends up arriving to their house, who wasn't supposed to come there, but their father invited her. So it turns out that their dad actually knew about the plan because their stepmom told him. And then Shyllan finds their stepmom dead. So after this, Bala and their dad have a big argument, and it turns into a bit of a sword fight where the dad hurts Balat's leg really badly, which we know now is why he was limping, or he had that leg injury in the first book. But then Shyllan actually gives her dad wine and she poisons him. So Shyllan finally kills him. But it doesn't just end like that. He technically doesn't die from the poisoning. He's still kind of twitching and he starts to wake up again. And then Shyllan says that she has to finish the job. So none of her brothers are willing to do it. So she gets the necklace and she twists it around his neck and kills him that way. So it was a really gruesome death. At the end of this chapter, we also see Shyllan talking to her dad, or thinking about how, she's sorry that she had to do this to him, and thanking him for what he did for her. Which to me, it kind of seems now that it's true that Shyllan was the one who was kind of responsible for their mum dying, and that their dad kept alive for them. Because there's a line in this chapter which was probably my favourite, might be one of my favourite lines in the whole book so far. It was, where is it? So it's when Shyllan is thinking and she says, "So it's come to this, the lie becomes the truth." Meaning that the lie that, he killed his wife was a lie, but that now it's become the truth from trying to hide this lie. So that to me was a really, sad situation in how he was lying to keep his daughter safe. We still don't know exactly what happened with Shyllan and the mum, but I'm guessing, or I'm going to talk about as if that is what happened. So it's really sad how her dad saw this horrible thing happen, and then made up a lie to protect his daughter, and then in doing that put himself to blame for his wife's death, and then that whole journey ruined his entire life, not only his life but his entire family's lives. And I'm not trying to say that he's justified in anything he did or anything, but I'm just saying it's really, I feel a lot for him even, and the rest of the family, and how it all played out, because it's just from what it sounds like, if it is what it was, what I think it is, it's a really, really tough situation. In chapter 74, Shylana and Kaladin are still hiding away from the high storm. So while there and hearing the high storm outside, they decide to talk to each other, and during this conversation they pretty much reveal everything about themselves to each other. They tell each other their whole life stories. So Shylana tells Kaladin about her dad, about everything that's happened to her with Yasna and why she's there, and Kaladin tells her about his brother and the being a slave and everything. But one thing that they both don't say to each other, they say everything except one thing, and that's that they're both Radiance, and the story is about both of their spren. So one thing that happened while Shylana was telling her story about how Amaram is the one that killed her brother, Kaladin says that he was the one who killed her brother. Now I did think this for a second back when we hear about the fact that Amaram killed Helleran, but for some reason I completely forgot, or some reason I didn't realise that it was actually Kaladin who killed her brother, and that her brother was the shard bearer that he killed to get the shard blade, which is what caused the whole thing. So I'm really hoping that this isn't something that gets in the way of Shylana and Kaladin's new forming relationship. This seems to be the case with Kaladin and everyone at the moment. So either the people that I want him to be friends with have a confusing relationship with him, considering they're friends with somebody that did something so bad to him, and with Shylana it's the fact that he has done something to her to kind of cause such a confusing, conflicting relationship. But I really hope that it goes okay for him. But after this, Kaladin sees a vision of the Stormfather. So during this vision, the Stormfather gets really angry at Kaladin and tells him that Syl's dead, that he's killed her just like the other Radiants did to their spren. So I was just saying that I hope Kaladin has a happier time as things go forward, but straight afterwards he hears that Syl's dead. I'm really hoping this isn't the case, because if it is, it's just so sad, because I don't want that to be the end of Syl. Like, it didn't feel like a proper ending to her kind of part of the story, but I really don't hope that's the end of her. But knowing what's happened with Yasna now, I mean, I kind of hoped that by this point we'd see Yasna again for some reason, but we didn't. So maybe it is the end of Syl, but I'm guessing it's not going to happen because it's Kaladin and he has to have these abilities. But I don't know, we're going to see. But he also actually questions whether Shylana is a Surge Binder as well, or if she's one of the Radiants. So I think he kind of knows that she is one of them. I don't think she knows anything. I don't think she thinks that Kaladin's anything more than just a really good fighter, but I guess we'll find out about that later on as well. But anyway, at the end of the chapter, the high storm's over, and well, I guess they're safe to climb out, and I don't know, they're safe from the whole situation that happened to them for the last, 5, 6, 7 chapters. But yeah, so hopefully the story's gonna move on to its last phase now. It kind of feels like after that, I kind of felt like after that whole situation in the chasms with Shylana and Kaladin was going to happen, that the story was going to move on to its final kind of act. So now I feel like that is the start of the final act, and the next chapter is Dalinar's chapter. So I guess we're coming to the beginning of the end now. Chapter 75 is the last chapter in part 4 of this book. So in this chapter, at the start, we see Dalinar, who's kind of preparing to go to attack the Parshandi, and then we see him react to Chilan and Kaladin coming out of the chasms, or well, arriving after coming out of the chasms. So first he questions them, like completely shocked at how they survived the high storm and everything, and then they tell him everything, but obviously they don't tell him everything. They say that they did encounter a chasm fiend, but that it died naturally, and that they just, hacked away at the rotted body to get the gem heart. During this time, after they've come back, Navani grabs Shylana and just takes her and tries to comfort her, tries to help her. I guess that distance she had a little bit with Shylana is gone now, because I guess she just got worried that this person that she'd been so cold to was in danger, and I don't know, but she's better now. Navani's kind of taken in Shylana now, finally. So after this, Shylana and Patton have a conversation, and they talk about what happens to Spren when they die, and Patton says a few things about how Spren don't actually die, they just revert back to what they used to be before, like mindless things that just exist somewhere. So maybe that's trying to tell us something about Syl. He also says that the reason Spren die is when the people they're bonded to break their oaths. And he says that it's inevitable that Shallan's also going to break her oaths. So that obviously means that Kaladin's broken his oaths. But I really hope that Syl doesn't die from this. Hopefully she comes back somehow. Maybe we're going to see him start to bond with her again. But I don't know. The way the Stormfather said that he's never going to be one of the Knights Radiant makes it sound like he's never going to get a chance to bond with Syl again. At the end of the chapter, Chilan and Adolin reunite and they're happy to see each other. But Adolin kind of tells her that I'm going to protect you from now on. And that kind of reminds Shylana of her dad when he wanted to protect her and keep her hidden away. And she gets really offended by that. But then after that, Shylana makes a deal with Dalinar that on his quest to go out to fight the Parshandi, he's going to ask her to come with him to make a map of the Shattered Plains to help him, navigate around there. But she also asks if she can do her thing and try to find a way to find the ancient city within the plains. So that's kind of where the chapter ends. I said in the last chapter how I thought it was coming to the last act of the book, and I guess this does mean it literally is the last act of the book, because we've only got one part left, part 5, and it's already starting with this whole huge war, and everyone's in the same place as well, so it's going to be everyone fighting for the same thing, and I'm sure there's going to be some crazy stuff happening in the future chapters. But yeah, next up is the interludes, so that's what I'm going to get to now. The 12th interlude is in Lan's perspective. Lan is an Ardent that works for the Queen of Dalinar, who's Elhokar's wife. So during the chapter, he's interviewing a new Ardent who's going to join the group of Ardents for the Queen. So during the conversation, we learned that the Ardents that are working for the Queen have a really luxurious life because the Queen lets them get away with anything. The reason she does that is because apparently she feels like she's not doing right in her life, and she's using the Ardents to treat them really well as a way to excuse her from her sins. So the young woman that Lan's interviewing, Lan expects her to be just like him and the other Ardents in that they willingly accept and are happy with the life that the Queen's given them, but she's actually really devout in her beliefs, and she believes that the Queen's really wrong in the things that she's doing. So we also learn that the Queen's lying to the people, that the poorer people in Dalinar and the outer towns are actually sending food and starving themselves to send to the soldiers in the Shattered Plains. But the thing is, the Queen can't even be bothered to give the food to them, so it's just rotting away. So the woman that's being interviewed by Lan, she tells Lan that she'll try to be a good example for the other Ardents, and that she's going to try to do the best she can and be as good as she can, but that she won't kind of tell on the other Ardents so that they're safe from that. But the next morning, she actually goes into the throne room, and in the throne room she's written the 10 foolish attributes of the 10 fools, and she's written how the Queen represents each of those 10 acts. So at the end of the chapter, we learned that this woman, she was executed the next morning, and that the riots started soon after. So this chapter really just is showing us what's happening in in Dalinar, while the main story is happening at the Shattered Plains. So apparently riots are now starting by the poorer people against the nobility. In the 13th interlude, we're with Ashonai. It's a pretty short chapter, but in it we learn that a lot of the Parshandi have now turned into storm form, and there's a few lines showing how Ashonai is kind of surprised by how naturally the people have taken to turn into storm form, and she's wondering if they've been that before. And we also learned that Venli, her sister, has not really changed in personality after becoming Stormform, and something about that kind of worries Ashonai. But anyway, they're all prepared, and they know that the Alethi are coming for them, and they're just kind of preparing to use their weapon against the Alethi, the bringing of the High Storm. In the 14th interlude, we're with Taravangian, and we actually learn a lot more about him. So we learn that he has days where he's more stupid, and he has days when he's more intelligent, and it's actually really strange in that he'll have days, specific days, where he's so stupid that he can probably barely talk or anything, and he has to be imprisoned by his guards and stuff. And then he has days where he's like a genius. And there was one specific day where he was so ingenious that he wrote this book called The Diagram, which is what Taravangian actually uses to plan ahead to do what he's doing. So throughout the chapter we learn more about him, and I think it's really interesting. It kind of makes Taravangian one of the most interesting characters in the book. So later on, Zeth comes and talks to Taravangian and tells him that there's a Radiant with Dalinar. so Kaladin obviously. And when he says this, Taravangian actually thinks about it, and he wonders if it's Yasna. So he knows that Yasna has surge binding powers, and then he also wonders if it's Yasna's ward. So he even knows about Shyllan having those powers. But then after that, when he's thinking it's a male and it could be somebody else, he thinks about how he was told during one of the visions, or when he was a genius and wrote the diagram, that the sign of knowing when the Radiants are going to come is that they're going to survive when you know they shouldn't have. So then he thinks about the bridge leader of Bridge 4, so Kaladin. He pretty much figures out that it's Kaladin. So he doesn't actually want Kaladin or any of the Radiants near Szeth, because apparently somehow it's going to make Szeth become free. We know Szeth's really dangerous, and Taravangian obviously needs him in his control. So that's why he wants Kaladin to stay away from Szeth, and he tells Szeth to go back and finish his job of killing Dalinar, and to try and do it when Kaladin is not there. Then at the end of the chapter, we learn that Taravangian becomes king of Yarkaved. See, I was a little bit confused there, because I thought he was already the king of Yarkaved, but that's what happens by the end of this chapter. So we also learned that what Taravangian is doing is actually exactly what Dalinar is doing in a way, because Dalinar is kind of motivated by his brother's last wishes to unite the world, and so is Taravangian. So Taravangian, apparently Gavilar told Taravangian about the visions that he saw from the Almighty, in that the world needs to be united. But Taravangian thinks that Dalinar needs to be killed in order for this to happen. And that was the end of the chapter. Looking back on this chapter, Taravangian, I already said he was really interesting, but he is really interesting. I love how in this chapter we see how when he's on his less intelligent days, he's actually a lot more emotional about the things that he's doing. But on his more intelligent days, he's less emotional, because he knows what he's doing, he has to do, and he knows the reasons why he's doing it. But yeah, at the end of the last few words in the chapter say that he knows there's going to be a lot worse for him to do, worse than having to kill Dalinar. In chapter 76, Dalinar is ready to go to his expedition in the Shattered Plains to kill the Parshandi. He's got everyone with him, his armies and everyone, and Kaladin is actually still waiting at the Shattered Plains because of his injury, which isn't healing because he hasn't got Syl or any of his powers. And he's watching Dalinar's army getting ready, and he goes down to say bye to Bridge 4. Dalinar, who was waiting to leave, only thought that he had one supporter, one High Prince to join him, which was Royon, but it turns out Sabariel came to join him as well. And then later on it turns out Aladar comes to join him, who has one of the strongest armies in the whole kingdom. Aladar's also somebody who's close with Sadius, so it was a really big shock to Dalinar. But Dalinar had a talk with Aladar, who says that what they're doing is right to fulfill the Vengeance Pact. So for that reason, Aladar's come to fight with them. Sadius is watching with his wife as Dalinar's army is getting ready, and he learns of how Aladar is going with them, and he's really hoping, but it seems like he already thinks and he knows that Dalinar's going to die out there, and that everyone with him is going to die out there against the Parshandi. He could be right, but I'm just guessing that Dalinar's not going to die. But I mean, considering who they're fighting and what we know of the Parshandi and the Stormform, there's a chance that they could die now. But anyway, Dalinar, while he's there, he sees Kaladin talking to Bridge 4, and he's also got Amaram with him. And he decides to kind of finally hash this out between the two, so he gets them talking, and he makes them confront each other. So Amaram denies everything that Kaladin's saying that Kaladin may have been part of his army, but that Amaram's never seen Kaladin before. And then Dalinar says, I think you're due for an apology. And Kaladin thinks he's the one who should apologize, but then Dalinar says, it's not you I want an apology from, it's Amaram. So I don't know exactly how it happened, I should probably read it again, but Dalinar did a little trick to test whether Amaram was actually trustworthy by using the Herald, Taln, to see what Amaram would do to take a shard blade. So there was a shard blade that Dalinar bonded with and hid away, and then planted away to see if Amaram was going to steal it or kill for it or something. So then it turns out he did do that, Amaram did do that, and lied to Dalinar about what he did. So that probably sounded very confusing, but I was definitely confused a little bit by exactly how that happened, how that played out. So I probably will read that before moving on to the next chapter. But anyway, so all it does is really prove to Dalinar that Amaram's not trustworthy, and then Amaram breaks down and he tells the truth, saying that he did do to Kaladin what Kaladin is saying. And then, I mean, it turns into a bit of a tense situation. Dalinar gets his shard blade out with the new one that he's bonded with, not Oathbringer, the new one, and he holds it to Amaram's throat. And then after that, he tells Amaram to leave his Night's Radiant cloak and to leave and run away. So that's what Amaram does. Kaladin still wants him to die, but Dalinar tells him that some people you just need to let them live their lives. But I guess we'll see what's going to happen with that. I think this means that we're not going to get anything else with Amaram in the rest of this book. So that's going to be saved for the next book if anything does happen with him. I'm guessing it's going to, but I'm guessing that's going to be in the next book now. Kaladin's also really happy, and he says to Dalinar that, "Thank you for believing me." And I'm happy that Kaladin's getting all these good moments with these characters, but it's a shame that it's kind of tainted by the fact that Syl isn't there. I still think Syl by the end of this book might come back, but I don't know. So the thing is, Kaladin is actually going to stay behind, and Moash is the one in charge of keeping Elhokar safe. So everyone's gone to fight with the Parshandi, with Dalinar, and there's a few of Bridge 4 who are left behind, and the person that Dalinar chose to leave behind is Moash. Now we know that Moash wants to kill Elhokar, and Kaladin is going to stay behind too. So maybe if I'm going to predict something now, I mean it's near the end of the book, but I'll still predict a few things. So I'm predicting that Kaladin is going to try to stop Moash from doing what he's going to do, and in doing that and kind of getting back his honor, he's going to be reunited with Syl. I mean, that's what I think is going to happen. But we're going to see. I mean, Zeth should be coming soon as well. So I don't know if Zeth is going to go to Kaladin or if he's going to go to Dalinar in the Shattered Plains. But I guess we'll see about that as well. In chapter 77, Shylana is still riding with the others on the Shattered Plains. She finds herself in the possession of the Words of Radiance book which Jasnah gave to her earlier on. But she lost it beforehand, and she asked Gaz to go and find it for her to buy another copy. So in this book, which she reads on the journey, she learns about the Knights Radiant and a bit about the different orders and the ideals. Each order of the Knights Radiant had different ideals, and they each worked in different ways. Like some would act individually, but the Windrunners would be in like teams. But later on in this chapter, Shylana tries to find another path to Uruthuru. Since I believe she thinks that the ancient city of Stormsea is within the Shattered Plains, she thinks that the Oathgate, which Jasnah spoke about in her notes, is the portal to Uruthuru. So while she's looking through her notes, Navani comes in, and before getting into the details of the scholarly work, they talk a bit about Jasnah, and they have a bit of a, I don't know, emotional moment, and they talk about, you know, how she was and everything. After that, Shylana tells Navani what she needs exactly to do what she needs to do to find, you know, the Oathgate or the center of the Shattered Plains to find a path to Uruthuru. So at the end of Shylana's part of this chapter, she tells Navani that Jasnah was one of the Knights Radiant, that she's not just like Dalinar who wants the Knights Radiant to return, but she actually was part of them. So she doesn't say anything about her being one of them, but she tells the truth about Jasnah. After that, we get a little bit of Kaladin, who's still at the barracks, and he speaks to Moash a bit about Moash's plans and what's his situation with Syl. He tells the truth that Syl's gone because he thinks him being part of this whole assassination attempt against Elhokar is causing a rift between him and Syl, and that he won't be able to carry on if he's like that. He's also coming to some realizations about the fact that Amaram did what he did to Kaladin and his crew to end in a place that he thinks is right, the same way that Moash wants to do something wrong, killing Elhokar, to end in a place he thinks is right with Dalinar as king. So pretty much they're discussing if the ends justify the means. And I know one of the ideals of the Knights Radiance is that journey before destination. So in this book, it seems like that's exactly what is going on with Kaladin at the moment. So I pretty much mean that Kaladin would need to act honourable through his journey over choosing a destination that he thinks is right. So it's pretty much telling him that he can't do things where the ends justify the means. So that's why I think at the end of this chapter, like I said in the last chapter, I think that Kaladin is going to try to find a way to stop Elhokar from being killed. In chapter 78, things are starting to ramp up. So at the start of the chapter, Dalina and Chilan talk, and Chilan pretty much reveals that she is a Radiant, and she does this by showing him one of her illusions, which is of Jasnah, and Dalinar is completely shocked, and he begins to like cry and stuff in front of her, and he says to Chilan that he wants her to be the new leader of the Radiance. So but before she does this, he actually says that he's questioning his purpose on whether he's the one who was supposed to found the Knights Radiant, considering they're already here. And then Chilan tells him that maybe your purpose isn't to refound the Knights Radiant, maybe it's to gather them. So yeah, Dalina asks Shyllan if she can be the new leader of the Radiance, or whatever position he'd given to Amaran. And she says she doesn't want to do it because she wants her powers to be hidden, because the only way her powers have effect is if nobody knows that they can be used. So Dalinar doesn't say anything, and then he does say that he wants to tell Navani, but that he won't tell anybody else. He also tells Shyllan that she's too valuable to keep here, so he wants her to be taken and escorted back. Then Shyllan tells him that he's not her king and he's not her high prince, and that she's not going to listen to orders from him, not in a disrespectful way, but in a very Yasna-like way. And she tells him that she doesn't want him to speak of her powers to anyone, not even Navani, without Shyllan's permission. And Dalinar's response to this is that she reminds him of Yasna, which Shyllan obviously really likes, because that's kind of her intention behind it. Then after this, they still talk about that kind of stuff, and then it's revealed that the Parshandi are here, that they've been spotted. So there's one that they find which is dead, and Shyllan examines the body, which is one of the Stormform Parshandi, and the Dalinar and the man that found the body look at the body and realize it's different. And upon hearing that they have different forms, Shyllan just thinks that they have different subspecies. She doesn't know that they change themselves. But when she sees the eyes, she opens the eyelid of the dead Parshandi, she sees that the eyes are red, and she realizes they're Voidbringers. So she tells them that the Voidbringers are here. And then after that, Shyllan is about to leave and go back. And during this, there's another Parshandi who's not actually killing anyone. He's not doing anything. He's just standing on a rock. And all the soldiers are around that rock with their spears up to the Parshandi. And the Parshandi doesn't say anything until it says Scar's name. And then Scar looks up to the Parshandi and realizes it's Shen. So Shen has been turned into storm form. But not only that, actually no, we don't know if it's storm form, but we know it's a different form to what he was before. So he's not Parshman anymore. So not only that, but Shen is saying that he surrenders to them. So if he's storm form, maybe that means that the storm form aren't just inherently evil or anything, that they actually have a choice. But then that makes me question, why did Eshonai change so much? In chapter 79, Dalinar has a talk with Shen, whose real name we know is Relaine. So he learns that Shen isn't actually a Parshman and never was. He was actually a Parshandi dull form that was sent as a spy for the Parshandi. So he's been doing this for 3 years, and he finally came back to the Parshandi, and after seeing what happened to Eshonai, he realizes that something's changed. He tells Dalinar that the Parshandi have now changed and that the old gods have returned, which is something we learn about near the beginning of the book. So he tells Dalinar that these gods want, hate humans and just want to kind of destroy them. So the reason why Relaine says that he's surrendering or being a traitor to the Parshandi is that he's wondering and he doesn't know where his loved ones are or what's happened to them, whether they've changed the way that Eshonai has or whether they've been killed, which we know is the case. Either they've been changed or eventually they're going to be killed. By the way, Shen is not actually a storm form. He's just a regular Parshandi. I don't know if he's a work form or war form, but he's not storm form. So the last thing that Relaine saw of the Parshandi was that the huge armies were being built and so on. He doesn't actually know anything else about the Parshandi, but Dalinar tells him to try and help Shyllan in trying to find the center, because that's where they're going now. So Dalinar's kind of hoping that that's going to help them somehow, even though they don't know what's going to happen with the Parshandi, because the thing is they don't even know if the Parshandi are going to attack or not, because they assumed that the Parshandi would attack soon, but there was no attack in the night. So right now all they're doing is trying to go to the center. In chapter 80, Shyllan and Dalinar and the rest of the people at the Shat Plains discussed what they're going to do about the Parshandi and how they're going to attack. So they know that they want to attack at a more controlled time so that they're prepared for it. So what they decide to do is to use the city, which, by the way, Shyllan has found Narak, where the Parshandi live, with the guidance of Relaine. And they decide that they're going to threaten their city, their homes, the Parshandi's homes, and in that way try to get the Parshandi to attack them so that they can start fighting. Dalinar also tells Shyllan that he hopes that her and Yasna's idea that there's a portal in the center of the Shat Plains is right. He's hoping that would work as an exit strategy if the Parshandi end up being too strong for them. So while I was reading this part, I started to think about how this book could end, and I started coming up with an idea of what would happen. So let's say the Parshandi win this battle and the and Dalinar and Chilan and everyone have to escape. What if they escape through the portal and end up being somewhere that's so distant and end up going to Urithiru and realizing that it's a lot harder to get back than they thought? So let's say something like that happens, and in the Shattered Plains and in Kholinar, Sadius says that all of them were killed, so that's what it looks like to them. So the Parshandi win. So I could imagine Sadius actually using that and then doing what he's thinking of doing anyway and taking the throne from Elokar. So I could imagine that actually being the second book. I could imagine in the second book, the beginning being about Sadius, Kaladin and those people in the Shattered Plains and Kholinar, while Sadius is king. Maybe Amram's there as well. And we've got the other group of people in Urithiru trying to get back. So I don't know why I had that thought, maybe I'm completely wrong, but that's a little thought that I had. But anyway, the next part of this chapter is with Kaladin, and he's having a conversation with Elokar. So Elokar tells him that, he wants Kaladin's help in becoming a better king, because he sees the way Kaladin acts and the way he's, respected and seen as a hero by all the people around him. And Elokar says he wants to be a king like that. He wants to be a king like Gavilar. And he asks Kaladin to help train him to be just like that. So Kaladin actually tells him that the best thing for him to do as king, or for the benefit of Elethkar, would be for him to actually step down as king. Elokar is definitely offended by hearing this, but he's not overly offended like he was in the arena. He actually apologizes for the way he acted in the arena, saying that he should have praised Kaladin for what he did, and it was actually, he says it was his own fault. He takes responsibility for ruining the plan against Sadius, saying that it was actually his fault that everything crumbled. Because of this conversation, Kaladin thinks about whether he should kill Elokar. Like, he has a little thought that he could kill him right here. But I'm guessing hearing him apologize and take responsibility does kind of make Kaladin question what he thought before, which I think is a good thing, so hopefully that helps things out. But there's also another line where Elokar says that when Kaladin came in, the shadows disappeared. So I don't know if that's got to do with Kaladin unconsciously taking in Stormlight, or if Elokar is seeing some sort of like shadow creatures, or maybe he's a Knight's Radiant or something. In chapter 81, there's a lot to unpack, so I'm going to go through it like section by section. So at the start, Dalinar and everyone are at the Shattered Plains, obviously, and they're on a plateau and they're discussing where they should go to start the fight. But while this is all happening, they see that on a plateau across from them, they start seeing glowing red eyes in the dark, and they see them start to appear more and more in number, and they see that there's thousands of them there. Rlain tells Dalinar that the Parshandi are singing a song, and that it's a dangerous song, and that the Alethi should attack or kill the Parshandi before they're able to finish that song. So Dalinar changes his plans, which was originally to wait until the Parshandi attack them, and he makes a speech that he sends to everyone that they're going to start to attack them now. So then the attacks start. Then we go to Kaladin, who's kind of just exploring around, walking around the war camps, and he meets Zahel, and he asks Zahel what he thinks he should do with the whole Elokar thing. And after talking to him and getting some advice with him, Kaladin starts to contemplate what he should do. And while he's doing this, he starts to realize that him justifying killing Elokar makes him sound a bit like the man who says that Tien's death was justified because it allowed the others to succeed. So when he's doing this, he realizes that if he kills Elokar, it's no different than the way Tien was killed, his brother. So this stops Dalinar thinking that doing what Marsh wants is right. Then we go to Adolin, who starts fighting against the Parshandi. We see the first of the Stormform's attacks, which is using lightning against their opponents. So the red lightning shoots out of them, but it's uncontrolled. It's like real lightning. They can't actually aim where it's going to go. It just kind of like bursts out of them in front of them. So this red lightning kills and fries Adolin's horse and also a bunch of the other soldiers. But then we learn that when Adolin's struck by this lightning, it doesn't affect him. The shard plate protects Adolin from the lightning, and then he realizes the shard plate was actually built to fight against the Parshandi, or well, the Voidbringers, which is why they were used by the Radiance back in the day. Then we go to Shylana, who's mapping out the Shattered Plains to try to find a way to the Oath Gate. And while she's doing this, she's approached by one of the soldiers who tells her about what the Parshandi are doing. then he starts talking about the map that Shallan's making, and he says it's wrong because the map that she's making is of the Shattered Plains, obviously, and she's actually said that it's, like we learned before, that it's symmetrical. So she's kind of matching certain parts of the map with the other side. But the soldier that comes to talk to her says that the map's wrong, saying that there's one specific part that's not the way she's drawn it. And then she says that if that's true, that means that part of the map, it doesn't match the pattern of the symmetrical Shattered Plains. So I don't know if this means that that specific plateau that the soldier was talking about is the place they need to go, or that the whole idea she had of the Shattered Plains leading to a center is flawed. Then we go back to Dalinar, who's kind of planning and kind of distributing which soldiers should go to fight and stuff. And he knows that the Parshandi, that the lightning isn't the final attack that the Parshandi are going to do, that the song is still going, and that what they do at the end is going to be much worse. And then he also sees that they're kind of controlling the wind, that the wind is getting more extreme, and the human soldiers are finding it hard to travel through it, but the Parshandi are traveling through it with ease. So Dalinar's continuing going. I think he's going to Shyllan to find out what's happening with the Oathgate, but then he hears a voice that tells him, "I'm sorry that you'll have to die this way." That is the same voice he heard in his visions, the Almighty's voice. At first I thought maybe this means that he's going to die here, but then I remembered that a lot of what the Almighty says to Dalinar is stuff that's already been said, that Dalinar is just hearing for the first time. So I don't know if this is like a vision, or the Almighty telling him what's happening, or that he's going to die, or maybe that a high storm is coming and Dalinar's gone into one of his visions. But yeah, that could be what's happened. So yeah, this chapter was really, really intense, and there's so much stuff happens in with each of the characters. I think each of the major characters had a perspective in this one chapter, and each of them had something important happen within their section. So yeah, this was a really good chapter. In chapter 82, we again jumped through various perspectives. So Adolin is still fighting with the Parshandi, and he's realized that what they're doing is trying to distract him and keep him busy while they plan or do something else with all the other Parshandi. So he looks at the how the Parshandi have kind of organized their troops, and they've got reserved soldiers at the back who are doing all the singing. And then Adolin remembers that Dalinar wanted the singing to stop, so he plans to get a gathering of his own men to go and do something. We don't know exactly what he's going to do yet, but he has a plan up his sleeve to try and end the singing, I guess. We then see Dalinar, and Dalinar talks to the voice, and he's not actually in a vision, and the voice isn't actually coming from, a pre-said set of a conversation that it was like it was before, but it's actually a piece of the Almighty that survived and is able to talk to Dalinar, and it tells him that he's going to die, or that this is where he dies. Dalinar then hears how the battle's going on with Roran's troops and everyone, and it's not actually going that well. So then he goes to Navani and asks for her help, and she was planning to do something with her Fabrials. So they do something, which I actually don't know exactly what they did. I was expecting it to be something to do. Earlier on in the book, we learn about Navani trying to find a way to make lifts out of Fabrials, but I don't think this is what this was. I think it was something that took the humidity or the moisture out of the air to make it clearer for the archers to see in the rain and stuff. So that way the archers were able to see, and the archers started shooting arrows at the Parshandi, which started to help. Finally, we go to Kaladin, who goes into the palace to try and stop Elhokar from being killed, because he knows that the assassination could happen any day. So he goes, and it turns out the assassination was going to happen now. So he finds two men that were waiting to do something, and he kills them, and then goes to Elhokar and finds him drunk, and Elhokar's still saying like he's sorry, and that, why is he the way he is, and he wishes that he was more like Kaladin, and he hopes that Kaladin teaches him and stuff. But then Kaladin tells him that he needs to take him with him. So Kaladin takes Elhokar and he goes with him, but then one of the men he killed from before is not dead yet, so he stabs Elhokar in the ribs. It's not a really dangerous injury, but he's still hurt, and Kaladin then kills that man and carries Elhokar with his injured leg as he tries to make his way out of the palace. But then, unfortunately, while he's making his way out of the palace, he comes across Moash and Graves, who are both covered in shardplate and questioning what Kaladin is doing. In chapter 83, Shyllan is with Renarin and a few others, and they're on the plateau that's shaped like a circle, the one that the soldier mentioned in the last chapter. So this plateau, the reason she feels it's notable is because it's not only like a circle, like the others are roughly shaped into a circle, but it's like a perfect circle. and when looking at it and looking over the Shattered Plains, it's kind of above all the other plateaus as well. So they're kind of thinking that this place, it survived after the whole shattering happened in the Shattered Plains, and the reason it's survived is because it was kind of made separate from the rest of the city, so that when the shattering happened, this place was kind of safe. But yeah, so while there, they look for some sort of, I don't know, sign or anything that leads to the Oath Gate, or something that's going to lead to a portal. So while there, they find like boulders made of creme. So I don't think I mentioned this before, but it's said throughout that the in the Shattered Plains, where the buildings used to be, over hundreds of years or thousands of years, the high storm rainfall leaves creme behind, and so creme has been building on top of it, on top of the buildings. So it kind of looks like, the way it was described in the book is like, if you look at a log after a snowfall, the snow is like completely covered and you've just got the rough shape of like something that exists there. So that's what the Shattered Plains basically is that all the buildings have been covered in creme. So she asks Renarin to get his shard blade to cut one of the buildings down, so to find something within, that's been preserved. Then we go to Adolin, who his plan was actually something to do with what Shylana just did, which is crack through one of the old buildings and use it as a way, because he noticed that the army of the Parshandi that was singing, they were kind of in front of a big boulder, so it was a huge boulder that kind of led to far away as well. So Adolin and his army went into the boulder from one end, and they found like an entire building or city kind of structure within, and they walked all the way through it to come behind the Parshandi in a hidden way, and they cracked through it and defeated all the Parshandi. Well, they killed a lot of them. While Adolin was fighting them, he gets stopped by Eshonai. So that's where we left off with him. Then we go to Dalinar, who's been wounded because he started to fight in the battle even though he wasn't supposed to fight. But yeah, he fought in the battle and he got hurt by a spear. So he gets that treated by a surgeon, and then after that he speaks to Navani for a bit, and then he speaks to the Almighty again. The Almighty says that, there's no chance of them surviving because they're meant to die there. And the Almighty says the only thing the Almighty, it doesn't say it is the Almighty, it doesn't say it's God or Spren or anything. It just says, it's very kind of mysterious in what it says, but I'm guessing it's the same thing that's been speaking to Dalinar or Kaladin throughout. So it is like the Stormfather or something along those lines. So then at the end of the chapter, it says that the Almighty, I'm just going to call it the Almighty. So the Almighty, or the Stormfather, let's say. I'm just going to call it the Stormfather. So the Stormfather goes and says, so the Stormfather says to Dalinar that he has to leave him now to speak to a daughter who's kind of about to break the rules or something. So I'm guessing that's Shylana. So maybe Shylana's going to get to speak to the Stormfather now. Maybe it's because she's trying to find the Oath Gate. So then we go to Kaladin, who's having a confrontation with Moash, and he's telling Moash that he shouldn't do what he's about to do. And he says that, don't kill the king because he should be better than that, pretty much he's trying to say. But Moash doesn't listen. He says it's too late, that he's decided what he's going to do, and he gets ready to pretty much fight Kaladin along with Graves. So it's two shard bearers against one very injured Kaladin. So I'm guessing this is where Syl comes back, heals him and protects him. But yeah, I'm hoping, see, Moash, I like Moash being part of the story, but he's not necessarily one of my favorite characters. I think way earlier in the book, if you go back to right near the beginning, I discuss I kind of rank my favorite members of the Bridge 4, well, the members that matter, and I think Moash was maybe at the end next to Scar, because even though seems like an important part of the story, he's not a character I really grew to like that much. But yeah, I'm glad. I like his position in the story, and I feel like his position is going to kind of end here now. And another thing I wanted to mention just for a little bit is that in the last chapter, Kaladin actually, he kills, like I said there, he kills two men that were about to kill Elhokar, who were working with Graves and Moash. Now, the thing is with this is that while I was reading it, I was kind of thinking, so Kaladin doing the dishonorable thing would be aid in killing Elhokar or killing Elhokar himself. Now, I'm thinking him killing Elhokar for being, let's say, a bad king, or doing it to justify getting Dalinar on the throne, is that much worse or more dishonorable than him, I don't know, killing these two men who, I don't know, we don't know these two, We don't know the positions of these two men or why they're exactly wanting to kill Elhokar. Maybe they're just naive in the way they've followed Graves. Maybe they're young, we don't know. So Kaladin killing them so brutally was kind of a bit of a mixed kind of thing to me. I mean, I might be just overthinking it, but I'm not saying it definitely is judging Kaladin oh, that's morally reprehensible, so you shouldn't be, it's a hypocritical thing to think killing Elhokar is bad, but killing these two is okay. But I mean, it's just something to question, so who knows? It might even be something that comes up later on in the book. So I'm just kind of mentioning my thoughts as I read, the book. So yeah, tell me what you think about that as well. Yeah, I should probably communicate with you a lot more in my videos, telling you guys to tell me your thoughts about various aspects of the book. But yeah, so in that case, tell me what your thoughts were about this part, or if you had the same thoughts as me, or if you have the opposite thoughts, and tell me why you have those opposite thoughts. In chapter 84, at the start, we're with Chilan, and they've entered the building that they think is going to lead to the Oath Gate, or is going to lead them to Urithiru. So inside they find like a temple or something, and they see that the walls have been painted, and it's just like a really majestic and beautiful looking place. And the paintings on the wall showed depictions of the 10 orders of the Knights Radiant, the 10 types of people that live in this world, and the 10 kingdoms. And then I started thinking that there's a lot of references to 10 of things, and there's also a 10-pointed star, which is like a keyhole, a metal plate in the wall that's shaped like a 10-pointed star, which is a keyhole for a shard blade. So all the 10 stuff reminded me that Sanderson has said that there's going to be 10 books in this series, so there's a lot of references to 10. So I don't know if there's certain 10 events that happen in each of the books that will end up meaning something by the end. But yeah, so Shyllan gets Renarin to use his shard blade to put it in the keyhole, but it doesn't really do anything. So she says to the other people that are with her to go and get everyone, all the soldiers and everyone, all the humans, to come onto this plateau to pretty much escape. And she says that they're going to try to figure out a way to open the portal. So the reason she wants everyone to go there now specifically is because she's told by Patton that there's not only a storm that's brewing from where the one that they already know about, but there's a second one coming from the opposite direction. So there's two storms going towards each other and will collide exactly where they all are. So the way it's described is that this event is going to cause extreme chaos and extreme destruction, that the whole plains, even entire plateaus will collapse and stuff. So then we go to Adolin, who's fighting with the Shonai, and during the fight he actually finds a way to push her off a plateau, and he's about to fall off too, but he's rescued by some of the bridgemen. But then, as he's about to try to find where his dad is, he finds a hooded man who turns out to be Szeth. So Szeth has come to kill Dalinar. We finally go to Kaladin, who's fighting against Moash, and he tries his best, but he's really easily taken down with just one punch by Moash to the gut. And Kaladin's down. He's reflecting how him only protecting people that he likes isn't a good thing to do. It isn't honorable. It's selfish, because if he's going to do the right thing, at times he's going to have to protect people that he doesn't like, And I guess what I said before about how I was questioning his morality and the whole idea of honor being killing those two separate people, I guess in that situation, those two people were going to kill Elhokar in secret, in hiding. It wasn't going to be like a fair one-on-one confrontation. It was going to be secretive, and I guess you could say that's immoral. I still think it's a little bit conflicting with that whole situation, but I mean, I understand that a bit more when reading this part. So Kaladin says, that he's this way, so he then tries to stand up again. He gets his dagger, and even though he's almost been entirely taken out, he stands between Moash, Graves, and Elhokar. And during this moment, he starts to hear Syl's voice, and is still having an argument with the Almighty's voice, or the Stormfather. And the Stormfather doesn't want her to do what she wants to do, which is go back to Kaladin and be bonded with him again. But she kind of defies him. And there was one thing that I really liked about this part was how, well, I haven't said anything about this, but if you're reading the book, you know that the font in which the Almighty's voice is spoken is very kind of different to the rest of the writing. It's much more spaced out, and it's all in capitals. And Syl, while she's talking to him, originally she's kind of just her speech is kind of written in italic, and the Almighty's is written in that special bolder spaced out font. and when she gets angry and she defies the Stormfather, her voice or her speech becomes like the Almighty's in that it's spaced out in that specific font. So that was one thing I really, really liked about how that was kind of set up. So then she tells Kaladin to say the words, and the words Kaladin says is that he's going to protect people, even the ones he doesn't like, because it's the right thing to do. So then Syl accepts these words, and the thing is, what I learned about this part is that the words, I don't know if the words are specific words. I think they're just realizations that Kaladin has to go through, or any of the Knights Radiant have to go through. Like, I don't think it had to be specifically those exact words, but those words reflect what Kaladin realizes. So then Syl kind of turns into a mist, and she goes into his hand, and this is one of the craziest parts in the whole chapter, is that, or the whole book so far, and she turns into kind of the mist that she is, wraps around his hand, and it turns into a shard blade. Not just any shard blade, but like one that's described that makes Moash's and Graves' shard blade look like dull compared to it. And this is tying into something I predicted a while back, which is when we started hearing the shard blades scream, and we heard Syl complaining that the shard blades were evil or something. I said that there's some connection between the shard blades and Spren in how people have to bond with them. So this makes sense here now. So I don't know if all the shard blades are Spren that are still trapped into the shard blade form. Maybe the way that the Almighty or the Stormfather describes as Spren dying is them becoming shard blades, and then the bond disappearing, which leaves the Spren stuck in the shard blade form. So maybe that's how the Spren die, and that's how the Radiance killed. Oh wait, now remembering one of the visions Dalinar had, he actually there was when the Knights Radiant gave up their oaths or something, they stabbed their shard blades into the ground and left them there. So maybe that was them abandoning their Spren and leaving them killed in a way by leaving them in a shard blade form. But I mean, I could be totally wrong about this, but that sounds pretty right to me. So yeah, so then he has a shard blade, and all the spheres that were in the hallway all go out, and the entire hallway is in darkness. And then it's described that light comes back to the hallway through Kaladin, like he kind of his skin illuminates, and he's like this huge kind of glowing person in this dark hallway, and then the reactions that Moash and Graves have is of shock, and Kaladin says that the Knights Radiant have returned. This was by far one of the coolest moments in the book. So another thing that happens right at the end of the chapter is that Graves is like shocked by what he sees, and he tells Kaladin that he says something in that he talks about the diagram, the book that Taravangian wrote, and he says that he was trying to keep Kaladin away from Dalinar, but he didn't realize that this was going to happen. So this is pretty confusing now, because if Graves is working with Taravangian and reading the diagram, then why did he want to kill Elhokar to make Dalinar king? Unless that was an entire manipulation to do something else, because Taravangian wanted to kill Dalinar. So I don't know exactly how that worked. So then Kaladin thinks about why he was separated from Dalinar, and then he looks over to into the Shattered Plains, and he realizes either the High Storms or Shen. He knows that Dalinar's in trouble. So I'm guessing now Kaladin is going to go to Dalinar to try and save him. In chapter 85, Shylana is still trying to find a way to open the portal to Urutheru. And while there, Renarin starts to have one of his epileptic fits, I think. But then he says that he screams to the Almighty saying, "Why do you show me visions of the future?" So maybe this is what happens to Renarin all the time. So I don't know if that's the case, but there was a point when Kaladin questioned the symptoms of Renarin's epilepsy, saying it's not exactly accurate to how he knows epileptic fits usually are. So after this, Renarin takes a rock and he starts drawing on the walls, and he says, and he just draws like a bunch of numbers, just writing 000 all over the wall, and he says that it's too late, we're dead. So I don't know what that means, but that's what's happening while they're there. Then we move on to what is the main focus in this chapter, which is the fight against Szeth. So we start with Dalinar, who sees Adolin in the middle of a fight with Szeth, and Adolin's pretty much already been taken out. He's not dead or anything, but his shard plate's cracked almost completely, and he's pretty much defeated. So Dalinar has a fight with Szeth, and it doesn't really go that well. It's such an epic fight as well. There's like various moves. It really reminded me of like like a video game. I mean, to be honest, Stormlight from the beginning reminded me of a video game, the way the fights happen and the way the powers happen. So, but there was like certain special moves that Zeth would do, like he'd go fly up into the sky and then come back down as like a comet, and it'd like, create a blast that would affect everyone around. And he'd often use his hand, like, when fighting with people, he'd parry their shots with blade, and he'd push them with his hand and like they'd go flying away. So he did this to Royan, who went to help Dalinar in the fight, and Royan pretty much was killed when he crashed to the ground. And then near the end, Adin also tries to fight, but he loses, and Dalinar is sent with that same move where Zeth pushes him with his hand, and Dalinar goes flying. So Adin thinks he's dead, but then Dalinar, when he comes flying down, he kind of comes slowly, and there's a huge crash of smoke, and Kaladin appears, and he says that he's gonna fight Zeth, saying that he now controls the wind and the sky. So one thing I noticed that maybe one of my first complaints with what I've read so far is that with Zeth, it seems like he's not just gone more villainous like I thought he was turning to in his interlude that we had, but he seems to be just kind of just gone completely insane now. And I don't know if I am happy with that, because I don't know, it seems really understandable that is what would happen to him, being forced to do something so unnatural to him, so being forced to kill all these people he doesn't want to kill. But from the perspective we got of him in the first book, it seemed a lot more like it made me more sympathetic to him as a person, and to understand his motivation and to try to root for him. But in this book we barely get any perspectives of his, and it seems he's kind of just turned into this crazy kind of insane person. So I kind of wish we had if he was going to turn into this person, I kind of wish we had a more of a gradual change and we saw it happen, instead of it just becoming this after where we left off in the last book. But tell me what you guys think about that. Do you have the same complaint? Are you fine with it? Tell me why not. In chapter 86, we follow Shylana and Kaladin as they're both trying to figure out a way to survive. So Kaladin's fighting Zeth and Shylana's trying to find a way to make the portal work. So this was probably the best chapter in the book. I don't know, it was so good. While I was reading this chapter, I was thinking how good this story is. Like, do you know when you're watching something or reading something, you enjoy what's happening, but in there's certain moments you're just like, oh, this is all so good. And that was it in this chapter. So I'll focus first on Shylana's story. So Shylana's trying to find a way to make the portal work, and she gets Adolin, and Adolin realizes that she's one of the Radiants, and she tries his shard blade in the keyhole, but it doesn't work. And then she realizes that the shard blade doesn't work in there because those shard blades that she's been using aren't of Spren that are living. So she then goes to the deep. She says that she's going to look for her deep truth, and that's that pattern is her shard blade. So do you know how Syl formed into Kaladin's shard blade? Shylana's shard blade was always pattern, which we didn't know about before, but we know now. And she puts it into the keyhole, and it works. So Kaladin, during his fight with Zeth, there's an ability that he has with Syl as the blade, is that she's not just a shard blade. Syl can kind of form into any kind of weapon for him. So it didn't only turn into a sword, it turned into a spear and a shield, a hammer and an axe whenever he needed it. And just the way it was written and the way this all happened was so freaking cool. Just showing how Kaladin would fight and turn his weapon into something else when he needed it. That way, like a shield to block the attacks, an axe when it was a good time to use an axe in the air, It was all so freaking cool. And another thing I noticed with this fight was that, do you know how before I was complaining about Zeth in the last chapter, I complained how I didn't like how his transformation happened. Here it's kind of redeemed, because I guess him being seen as this evil kind of crazy person is just from the perspective of Dalinar and everyone. But the main reason he's kind of acting this way is because the reason he became truthless and the reason he's, obeying the Oathstone and killing all these people is because he predicted, or he said, that the Knights Radiant were coming. So now realizing that Kaladin actually is a real, true Knights Radiant, Zeth was never actually wrong, and he did all this killing and all this immoral stuff that he didn't want to do for no reason, that he could have stopped it at any time. And that's the reason he's so against it. So in a way, he's hoping that the Radiants don't exist and that he has to obey everything that's told to him, because then it would mean that it wasn't in his control, that it wasn't his choice. And in that sense, his story is actually really, really good. I still think it might have been more worth it to have a bit more of his perspective throughout this book to make it feel more impactful, but I do think it works in what it needs to do. So Szeth eventually talks to Kaladin and says, "You are a Knights Radiant," and Kaladin says he is, and then Szeth realizes the truth, and then when Kaladin's about to attack him with the final blow, Szeth just gives up and doesn't attack or doesn't try to parry. And in that moment, Kaladin doesn't actually aim for a killing blow. He just aims for his wrist, and Szeth just lets it happen, and the sword falls out of Szeth's hand, and like all the stormlight fades away from Szeth as well. So Syl says that Szeth gave up his bond with his sword, meaning he's lost all his powers. And Szeth falls to the ground onto a plateau, and Syl tells Kaladin to try and find the sword so that Szeth doesn't bond with it again. So Kaladin gets the sword and Szeth falls to his death, or if he's alive, he falls powerless. So I'm really interested in finding out what happens to Szeth later on. Oh, and one thing I should have mentioned that I didn't mention is that so when it worked with Shyllan, the portal worked. It actually, everyone on that plateau disappeared and landed on an identical looking plateau in Urutheru. So they've all, the armies, Dalinar, Navani, Chilan, Adolin, they've all ended up there now. But yeah, so at the end of the chapter, Szeth has fallen to his death or his powerless state, and Kaladin takes the sword and he speaks to Syl. It's a really good interaction between him and Syl. I don't know, at the end, Syl tells Kaladin that I'll accept like an apology or like, thank you in the form of a smile. And Kaladin smiles, and he's like, it's a really genuine smile, and he says it feels really good. So this was like such a good feeling moment, because you always want Kaladin to be happy, I'm sure that's the same with everyone who's reading this book. You always want Kaladin to be happy and safe and everything, and well, it feels like that happened at the end of this chapter. At the start of chapter 87, Kaladin is walking on the Shattered Plains with Syl, and while he's having a conversation with her, they discuss Szeth and the Honor Blades. And it turns out that the shard blade that Szeth had was actually an honor blade, which is not a regular shard blade, and not a shard blade that's made out of a spren. The honor blades are certain blades that the heralds have, they existed actually before any of the Knights Radiant existed. So anybody who holds an honor blade and has one, they get the lashing abilities or the powers that the Radiants usually have. So the honor blades were given by the Almighty to the heralds, and then the spren kind of learned that kind of ability and stuff from that whole situation, and that's how the whole Knights Radiance order came into existence. Kaladin then finds Bridge 4 at the Oath Gate on the Shattered Plains, and they discuss a little bit about how Kaladin now has blue eyes, and also they discuss a little bit about how when Kaladin first came during the whole battle, that Bridge 4 started to glow a little bit. They start referencing Dalinar's visions, and some people say that the Knights Radiants weren't the only ones with those abilities, that it was other people as well. It wasn't just the Knights. So maybe somehow Kaladin's Bridge 4 are going to end up having abilities similar to Kaladin, but who knows. I also should mention that, I don't think I mentioned this before, but the battle that happened with the Parshandi is pretty much solid that the Alethi did win that. The humans beat the Parshandi, and they're all expecting that most of the Parshandi are pretty much dead. We then go to Shyllan, who's at Urutheru with everyone else, and they're in a bit of a difficult situation because they can't find an easy way to get out of there. There's no way to leave like on foot because it's so high up in like the mountains and stuff, and the Oath Gates require a huge amount of stormlight to use, so they're kind of stuck there, and Shyllan is actually the only one who's able to use the Oath Gates because her Shardblade is the only one that's living. But that changes when Kaladin arrives there as well. So they also discuss how the Everstorm is still to come, that the high storms that we saw before were mostly just kind of the beginning, and that the huge Everstorm is still about to come, that's being led by the Almighty. This Everstorm is actually going to be a high storm that's going to come in the opposite direction. So this is going to be really dangerous for the kingdoms because most of them have prepared, or all of them are prepared, for the high storms to come in one direction. So the buildings are kind of structured in a way to prepare for that or be ready for that. And so a high storm coming the opposite direction is predicted to cause extreme chaos around the entire world. Navani gets a bit worried about Elhokar, and because they don't know exactly where he is, but then Kaladin says that he's left him in a safe place, which is with Lopen and Lopen's family. So in that, we get a bit of a perspective for Lopen, which I didn't expect. Lopen is actually, in his perspective, we see he's with Elhokar and they're protecting him, but we also see how Lopen is trying to use radiant abilities, saying that ever since he saw Kaladin using them, he thought of himself, and he thought that he also has those abilities. So he's always looking at a sphere and trying to get Stormlight from it. So at the end of his perspective, Lopen actually is able to get the Stormlight out of the sphere, and what it does is it disappears pretty quickly, and that's because we know that Lopen's only got one arm, and the scar where his arm was cut off from, it starts to grow a little bit. So, and then at the end of the chapter he says, "Give me all the Stormlight, I've got some regrowing to do." I don't know if this is similar to what I was talking about before with the Bridge 4 having some of the abilities because of the stuff I was saying about the Knights Radiant, or if Lopen's specifically a pretty special guy. I'd kind of want Lopen to be pretty special because I like him so much, but yeah, that it would be cool either way. In chapter 88, Shylana is searching through the tower in Urithiru, and while there she finds a note on a door from the Ghostbloods, and behind the door is Mraize waiting for her. So he'd actually followed her to Urithiru, and he's found out who she actually is, that she's not Veil, that she's Shylana. He doesn't try to kill her, he says that she's still one of them, but that she has to still be part of the Ghostbloods. And he kind of tells her that even though you're Shylana and a Radiant to the rest of the world, you'll still be Veil for us. So he kind of blackmails her into helping them or being part of them, and saying that he and the Ghostbloods saved her brothers in Yarkaved from the Succession Wars, and that he says it's a gift, but really it's just a blackmail to get her to continue working with him. So also another thing that I forgot to mention there was that when she was talking to Mraize and the Ghostbloods, Mraize says that doesn't Shylana want to know the secrets of her family, of her dad and her brother. Her dad for wanting to join the Ghostbloods, and her brother for wanting to find the Skybreakers. So this is the first time I think we've heard of the Skybreakers, but we hear about them again later on. After that, Shylana goes to her room, and it's a room that Patton picks out for her. So when she goes inside, Patton tells her it's time, and the room's kind of laid out similar to the to her father's room in Yarkaved. So Patton tells her that it's time for her to accept the truth, or to deal with and confront the truth of her past. Well, during this, a vision starts to happen, and she sees the painting. Do you know how before she would see her mother's soul behind the painting? Well, it turns out it wasn't her mother's soul, it was a shard blade, it was Patton. So her father hid Patton away in there to keep him away from Shylana, because Shylana is the one who killed her mum with the shard blade. So the way this all happened was, her mum was actually talking to her dad saying that Shylana needs to die because she's one of them. So we don't know exactly who Shylana's mum is, or why she wanted to kill Shylana, but she did. So her mum comes at her with a knife, and when Shylana was young, she used Patton, the shard blade, and killed her own mum. So this was the huge secret that she kind of kept hidden from herself and from everyone else, and the big truth she's been hiding her entire life pretty much. So she killed her mum because her mum was trying to kill her, and her dad took the blame, and in doing that he ruined their entire family, and the entire situation was messed up all because of that one thing. So Shylana finds this really hard to accept or to kind of deal with, and she says how much she hates her mum and how much she hates Patton, and Patton says he understands, but Shylana says that she doesn't really want revenge or to kill Patton, even though he says that eventually she's going to. She just wants her family back. So this was actually something I predicted back right at the start. So if you go back in the video, or go back to the first video, in the first flashback chapter of Shylana's, I said that this is what happened. I said that Shylana's mum was killed by Shylana, and her dad had to cover it up and had to hide Shylana away for that reason. So I actually, as the story went on, even though that's what I thought right at the beginning, a lot of the other stuff made me think that wasn't true. So the story was starting to convince me that wasn't true, but then at the end it ended up being true. So the next part of this chapter we're reading from Amaram's perspective, and Amaram's writing a letter to somebody called what's his name? To Restoraz. So he's saying how he's working as part of like a group of people who are trying to bring back the Heralds, and trying to bring back the Voidbringers, and doing all this destruction to bring back the Heralds. So he then goes to the Herald that we met before, Talon, and he tries to take him with him. But while he's in the prison cell with Talon, one of the Ghostblood members is in there, and he tries to kill Amaram. Not the Herald, but Amaram himself. So then in that situation, the Herald actually protects Amaram. But yeah, after that he goes back to his kind of rants and kind of repeated phrases again and again. So the final part of this chapter we read from Szeth's perspective. So Szeth isn't dead, he was actually saved by another Herald, the Herald of Justice, who tells Szeth that the Herald had used the regrowth powers to bring Szeth back to life, and says to Zeth that he has now a bigger part to play, that he's going to be taught by the Herald to let go of his emotions and try to follow the laws and the justice properly, so that he actually tells Zeth that he has a new kind of purpose in life now, to go and change his culture, the Shin, their ways, to kind of make them correct, because technically it was the Shin's fault that Zeth became truthless and had to follow the Oathstone for no reason. So Zeth has now been given the responsibility to do that thanks to the Herald, and he kind of accepts it. The Herald also says to Zeth that he's going to be part of the Skybreakers, an order of the Knights Radiant. So that's what the Skybreakers are, a different order. So now Zeth, I'm guessing that means Zeth is going to kind of join the side of good, I'm hoping, and he's not going to have to deal with a lot of the bad stuff from before. See, my biggest problem with Zeth in this book was that it kind of seemed from other people's perspectives that he wasn't the Zeth that we knew from the first book. But obviously that isn't true, and it was only because we were reading from other people's perspectives. But there's a few things here, like in this final line, "Hello," a cheerful voice said. That kind of stuff makes him sound a bit crazy, but I don't know, I'm hoping he's not crazy. But yeah, I'm really glad where Zeth's story is kind of going now. I'm excited to see what happens with him next. In chapter 89, Adolin is in the tower in Urutheru, and while he's there he hears a voice and he knows it's Sadius. So him and Sadius have a confrontation. Sadius tells him that he doesn't believe Dalinar or that about everything that happened, and says that it was probably Dalinar working alongside the Parshandi to put on this show to make the world obey them. But while Adolin's refuting this, he notices that even Sadius doesn't really believe that. He's just proving that he's not going to stop and trying to taint Dalinar's name, that these lies that he's saying, that he doesn't even believe himself, are the ones that he's going to tell the world to try and discredit Dalinar. And surprisingly, something shocking happened here, which was that Adolin just killed Sadius. he literally just got his knife, pushed him to the ground, and stabbed him in the eye. And we know that Sadius is definitely dead because his Shardblade, Oathbringer, arrived, which means that it's now Adolin's. But yeah, Sadius is actually dead. So I didn't expect that because, well, here's the thing, I didn't know. See, there's a few things I do know about what happens in these books. I know a few spoilers. So I knew that Sadius would die eventually because I heard, I think, Daniel Green saying it in one of his videos, but I didn't know when it would happen. So I didn't expect it to happen in this book. I thought it would happen at the end of the next book or something. But yeah, he's dead already. So I'm guessing that with his storyline, I think his wife, Ayalai, is going to take over his role in the story. And she's going to be the one to try and take power, which I think is a good idea because even though we've barely seen her, she does seem more kind of interesting than Sadius with the whole, I don't know, the manner in which she wants to take power. So yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing her a bit more as well. And who knows what she's going to say now, how is she going to become knowing that her husband's been killed. So then the next part of the chapter is Dalinar. So Dalinar talks to the Almighty, and the Almighty, well, it's not the Almighty, it reveals what it actually is, which is the Almighty existed, and then the Almighty was killed, which we know about already. But this, the Stormfather, I'll call him, just to kind of create separation, is kind of only like the memory of what people have of the Almighty, and he still has power, but he's still kind of just a shadow of what the Almighty was. So the Stormfather tells Dalinar that the Everstorm is gonna come again, and the Everstorm is gonna keep like coming again and again. But the thing with the Everstorm is it's not just a regular storm. It's gonna be a storm that's gonna wake every parchment and turn them into the Voidbringers, storm form. So that is going to be a lot of trouble, and we hear about what the other characters' reactions to this are as well, and they're rightfully dreading it. Dalinar then tells the Almighty that he with what's happening in the world, he needs to become a Radiant. So he actually speaks the words, the Radiant's words, and his are a bit different. His aren't the ones that Kaladin said. He said the first one, which is life before death, but the second one he says that he's going to be the one to unite men instead of divide them. And then the Stormfather accepts Dalinar's words and tells him that he is now a bondsmith, one of the orders of the Knights Radiant. So Dalinar then goes to Kaladin and Shyllan, and they talk about how the Everstorm is going to come and change all the Parshmen into storm form. And Kaladin says that knowing this is going to happen, he needs to run and find his family, his parents, and save them. So that's where Kaladin goes off at the end of this book. And then Shyllan and Dalinar talk, and there's more than just Dalinar as a new Radiant. So Renarin comes in and says that he's also one of the Radiants, and I think he's called a Truth Watcher. And this is why, do you remember in the arena when Renarin fights, but then he had a fit as soon as he got his shard blade. That fit wasn't actually an epileptic fit, it was the shard blade's screams which forced him to become like that. And also in the Oathgate, at the Oathgate, Renarin having those visions, that's what his power is. He has the power to see the future, I guess. Another thing I should mention is that Dalinar actually had to give up his shard blade to become a Radiant, and that's because, as we know, they're dead Spren and they represent the killing of all the Spren. So the only way he could become a Radiant was after giving that up. The chapter ends with Dalinar and Chilan thinking about what's going to happen in the future and knowing how many deaths there's going to be, considering how many Parshmen there are, and pretty much the fact that there's only 4 Radiants they know about, and there's hundreds of thousands of Parshmen that are going to become Stormform Voidbringers. Also, another little thing that happened in this chapter was Dalinar got word from the king of Azir, the Emperor of Azir, which we know from one of the interludes is the one who took power, who was one of the thieves with that Radiant girl who had the Edge Dancer abilities. So yeah, I'm guessing that might be a little tie-in to the novella that's after this book, which is Edge Dancer, which comes in between Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. So in the epilogue, or what is the last chapter of this book, we're with Wit, and he's going on with these ramblings about art to this lizard, but then while he's doing that, he sees a light like forming in front of him, and after it's appeared, Yasna Kholin is there. So Yasna is alive, and I think he describes her as having like burns on her face, and they talk about how she went to the other side, but now she's returned. So Yasna tells Wit that she wants to continue on with the stuff that she was mentioning before she died. Things like, finding Urithiru and warning people about the Parshmen. But so she doesn't actually know about what's happened in this entire book. So I think she did die, but she went somewhere else, and now she's returned. I don't know what this other place is, but she did say that she spoke to High Spren and that she knows how things are going to happen. But then Wit tells her that, the Everstorm's going to come and transform all the Parshmen that way. But she says that that's not how she thought she learned that it would happen. Meaning, if that's different to the way she thought things could happen, then everything else that she thinks is going to happen could be false too. But yeah, at the end of this chapter, she's back, and that's pretty much what happens at the end of the book. So she's back now, and she's with Wit, and I'm guessing she's going to go to the other Radiants now. So it's not 4 against the entire world, it's 5. But yeah, so that's the end of the Words of Radiance, and it's been a long time. I think it may have been quicker if I didn't change the format of making these videos so often, but like I had to wait a few times because I had to order various things like, a tripod or like a mic and stuff like that to make the videos better for you guys. So yeah, but I think after having everything set up, this last video, the one you're watching now, the final part, it's taken a smaller time to make. So you're going to see that this video is pretty long, and it's come to you only about a week or a little bit more than a week after my last one. This was the first time I ever did something like this, which is reading an entire book from beginning to end, chapter by chapter, and experiencing the whole thing with you guys on a video. So I think it's pretty cool. I don't think I've ever seen anybody else do it, so I thought it was a good idea to try and do. So let me know if you guys liked it, and I'm planning on doing this with a bunch of other books, because I feel like I actually have an entire documentation of every moment I experienced through this book. So imagine in the future when this series is one that is really, really dear to my heart, and I go back to these videos and I can watch my first time ever reading through this book. So when I think of it like that, I'm really happy. And also, you guys' reactions have been so good. Like, you're commenting that you want more of the videos, and you're sharing your opinions and stuff with me. So I really like that. Hopefully when I make these videos for other books, I'm gonna ask you more and more about your opinions on certain things in various chapters. And I have plans for a lot of other stuff I could do with this series. But yeah, next up I'm gonna read Edge Dancer, because I just ordered that and I've got it with me. And it's probably gonna be a lot shorter. It's gonna probably I might separate it into 2 parts, or I might do it just 1 part. But yeah, that's gonna be a small series. I might go to Oathbringer straight after that, depending on what you guys want, because I don't mind going to a different series for a bit and then going back to Oathbringer. But I mean, the reason I'm thinking of finishing off Stormlight instead of going to a different series now is because I learned that the Rhythm of War, certain chapters of it are being released every month or every week or something, and I think since that's going to happen, I could actually react to each chapter as it comes out, so it'd be kind of a thing we all do together. But yeah, so just tell me what you guys think, what you've enjoyed in this series, what you think I could improve on. Just let me know. Hopefully you enjoyed this as much as I had, because I definitely really enjoyed this book. So finally, I'll give a few words on my thoughts on this book, but I'm going to save most of that for the review. I really enjoyed this book. I've said throughout that I think the pacing's a lot better than the first book. I do think there's a few moments here and there where I think the pacing could have gone a bit quicker, because it is such a huge book, and I don't think anything in the book shouldn't be there. But I mean, in terms of pacing, yeah, there's definitely a few moments where it's a bit slower and a few moments where it's faster. But I mean, that's going to happen in almost every book you read, especially something this big. When you want to make a book this big, you're going to have to have some sacrifices in the pacing. But yeah, I think in general, the pacing in this book is a lot better than the first. And I actually enjoyed this book a lot more too, because if I think back to this book and the kind of the images that come into my head on the various moments, there's a lot more. Even though the first book had its feelings and its vibe and its imagery too, this book, when I think back on this book and all the moments, like when Kaladin and Szeth are above the clouds and they're fighting, things like that, I'm not going to forget that. That's a seriously good moment. I'll save the rest of my opinions and thoughts for the review, and I guess I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good day.